I call now on Pastor Drackett, President of the Seventh-day Adventist Conference, to say prayers.
Let us bow our heads. Our God and our Heavenly Father, we praise your name this morning for the privilege that we can be gathered in this noble house today. Thank you, Lord, for your leading in these Cayman Islands, your blessings over all these many years. And today, as we gather here to deliberate, as we present the throne speech and the budget address, we ask for your blessing and your divine guidance. Thank you, Lord, for establishing these islands on the sea. And we endeavor to praise and to honor and glorify you, always recognizing that it's by you that we move and we have our being. We ask your special blessing upon our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth II, upon Philip of Edinburgh. We pray your blessing upon Charles, Prince of Wales, and the entire royal family. We pray, O Lord, that you will bless the leaders as they exercise their authority in these commonwealth. In a special way, we ask your blessing upon the governor of these Cayman Islands, upon our premier, the leader of the opposition. We ask your blessing, O Father, upon the legislature, upon all the men and women whom you have chosen to lead and to exercise authority in these Cayman Islands. We pray your special blessing upon each of them as they carry out their responsibilities. Father, we pray that you will guide, that you will bless, and Father, at the end your name will be glorified. Bless every branch of the government, O Father. Just continue to glorify yourself in these Cayman Islands. And we do not cease, Lord, to give you the praise and the glory for having been so good to us. Father, now we say, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. May the Lord bless and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon us and be gracious unto us. May he lift up his countenance upon us and give us peace, today and even forevermore. Amen.
Please be seated. This Honorable Legislative Assembly is now in session.
Reading by the Honorable Speaker, messages and announcements.
Thank you. We are indeed privileged, and I'm delighted to welcome here this morning some very special people, former members of the Assembly, some diplomats, and very special guests with us here this morning. Other very special guests, I should say. We do have former members, Dr. the Honorable Mary Lawrence, former Speaker, MBE-JP, Dr. the Honorable Linford Pearson, former Speaker, OBE-JP, the Honorable Kurt Tibbetts, I think, is here with us this morning, OBE-JP, and his former Leader of Government, and the Honorable Truman Borden, OBE-JP, former Leader of Government. We have also with us Ms. Lucille Seymour, BEM, former MLA. And we do have with us the Honorable William Bush Howard, who is Deputy Ambassador of Colombia to Jamaica and Colombian Council to Canada, in also, and I should just stick in here just so the press will have it right, he's my cousin. He is. And we do have, so very pleased to have with us Davina Bennett, who is Miss Universe, second runner-up, 2017 from Jamaica, and our own Miss J.C. Patrick, Miss Cayman World 2019, Mrs. Juliet Gooding, Honorary Consul to Barbados, and Mr. Garth Arch, Honorary Consul to Spain. We are indeed most pleased to have you with us. Those of you visiting with us who are here will observe some of our parliamentary work. Those of you who are visiting with us, I do hope you are enjoying the beautiful Cayman Islands, and trust that you will enjoy with us Mr. Norman Borden, former member of Executive Council, OBE JP, and no stranger to us in this Legislative Assembly. Thank you all for visiting with us. As I said, trust you will enjoy today's proceedings.
Motion for the suspension of the House.
The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this Honorable House now do rise to await the arrival of His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Martin Keith Roper, OBE, to receive a gracious message from the throne.
Question is that this Honorable House do rise to await the arrival of His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Martin Keith Roper, OBE, to receive a gracious message from the throne. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The House will suspend proceeding for a short while, asking all members and visitors to remain in their seats. The Honorable House is now in session. Please be seated. I here now invite His Excellency, the Governor, to address this Honorable Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, honourable members of the Legislative Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It has been little over a year since my wife, Lizzie, and I arrived in these beautiful islands. We have very much enjoyed getting to know you and are very grateful for the warm, Cayman-kind welcome we have received. It is an honour to join you today to outline the government's plans for the financial years 2020 and 2021. The budget reflects the agenda of the National Unity Government. It will fully comply with the Public Finance and Finance Law and the principles of fiscal responsibility. And I pay tribute to the government's prudence and responsibility in handling our public finances. In 2020-2021, government will continue to strengthen the economy and enhance the quality of life of Caymanians and all those who live on these islands. Plans for the next 2 years include major investment in the roads network, completion of the new John Gray High School, and a Sunrise training centre for adults with special needs. Work is also expected on the integrated solid waste management system, as well as the long-term residential mental health services facility, which will allow patients to be treated on island for the first time. The Ministry of District Administration, Aviation, Tourism and Transport also plans to move forward 2 significant projects: the cruise berthing facility and enhanced cargo port, subject to the result of the referendum, as well as airside works at Owen Roberts International Airport. There will also be continued investment in the infrastructure of Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. These projects seek to ensure that the Cayman Islands can support growing numbers of tourist arrivals in the near future and consolidate the sector's contributions to the economy and jobs. While tourism is an established pillar of the economy, government is well aware of the importance of diversification and will be looking to stimulate growth in other areas of the economy that promote sustainability, such as agriculture. A national food safety and security policy and strategy is expected during the coming budget period that will include proposals to increase local agricultural production and enhance opportunities for local entrepreneurs. As government grows the economy, agencies within the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure will work to provide a strong strategic and technical foundation focused on building local capacity. The Planning Department will continue to work to update the current development plan, and Public Works Department will double the size of its already highly successful apprenticeship programme. Another agency that delivers targeted training service to develop our local talent is Workforce Opportunities and Residency Cayman. In 2020-21, the agency known as Work will introduce online services that facilitate the advertising of vacancies as well as assorted application and administrative processes. A key goal for government is to provide the best educational opportunities for Caymanians of all ages, abilities, including vocational and technical training. Government will work to implement the new primary school curriculum. And the Ministry of Education has planned new and enhanced programs to target young learners, mature students, and those with special needs. To enhance the quality of education services, the Office of Education Standards will increase its inspection programme over the next 2 years. In addition to meeting the educational needs of young people, government is also committed to supporting the most vulnerable in our communities. This includes children, but also older people and families in need. Many initiatives are underway to promote this objective, including a residential facility for children in care and the revision of legislation that touches on adoption and child welfare. To support older persons, government will work to lower their cost of living. Of course, a sense of physical security is also central to well-being and quality of life. Overall crime is down by 15% year on year, but there is no room for complacency. I strongly support our excellent Police Commissioner's modernisation programme for the RCIPS. As announced in early December, RCIPS will add a second Airbus H145 helicopter to its fleet to support border security, operate rescue and medevac services within the islands, as well as provide local and regional disaster response and aerial support to the Coast Guard. The police will also work to prioritise investigations related to child abuse and domestic violence through the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, MASH. An early and important initiative for the Coast Guard will be the establishment of an Operations and Rescue Coordination Centre. Like the Coast Guard, Customs and Border Control protects our borders with a particular focus on ports and airports. A key initiative for CBC in the coming year will be the introduction of automatic border control solutions at Owen Roberts International Airport. Similarly, the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is responsible for 5 public safety agencies, will continue investing in technology while working to leverage inter-agency collaboration across the public and private sectors as it strives to best serve the interest of public safety. The National Security Council, which provides input and overarching guidance to all agencies tasked with crime, safety and security matters, will continue to meet regularly and to tackle a number of challenges, including marine safety, road safety, border security and cyber security. An updated threat assessment will enable the preparation of a new crime reduction strategy. The fight against crime will also include the implementation of a national anti-gang strategy and plan and a national child safeguarding plan. Both initiatives will be the work of teams from across government. Work will progress on setting up a Cayman Defence Regiment to bolster security and reinforce humanitarian assistance and disaster relief capability in the Cayman Islands as well as the other overseas territories and across the region. And I'm very pleased a team from the Ministry of Defence will arrive next week. Given the Cayman Islands' status as a global financial services centre, the fight to keep the jurisdiction free of international financial crime and maintain our strong reputation is of central importance. Adopting international best practice, keeping fully in line with increasing global regulation and recent international assessments, such as the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force and the European Union, play an important role. The Ministry of Financial Services has also planned increased engagement with international stakeholders to address misconceptions about the jurisdiction. To help the government achieve its objectives, public service agencies will work to develop their capacity to deliver effective and efficient programs and services that meet the needs of Caymanians and residents. Civil servants will focus on innovation and using evidence-based analysis in their decision-making. The Treasury Department, e-Government Unit and Postal Service plan to introduce more online services, including online banking for government agencies, stronger security and mobile apps. The Economics and Statistics Office is set to conduct the 2020 Population and Housing Census late next year and will use findings to inform policy and decision-making in the public sector and business. Our exceptionally able Deputy Governor will continue to promote a world-class civil service, working on the goals of the Civil Service 5-year strategic plan of developing leaders and talent, improving customer service standards, and developing a strong communications service. My office will continue to give strong support to our independent commissions and officers who do excellent work to underpin our good governance, including our highly respected judiciary who do so much to support our security and prosperity. I am pleased that the UK-Cayman relationship is strong, based on partnership and mutual respect. A highly successful visit by their Royal Highnesses the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, and 2 ministerial visits underlined our enduring bonds. We have had constructive discussions on a good and sensible package of constitutional changes to modernise and update our relationship. I hope these can soon be concluded. I have commented separately on yesterday's important appeal court judgment on same-sex marriage. It is my belief that government should act with reasonable haste to comply with the court's direction. And as your governor and representative of Her Majesty the Queen, it is my strong wish that despite strong feelings and beliefs on this issue, everyone in this honourable House will choose their words carefully and treat everyone with courtesy, dignity and respect. I would like to end by thanking all members of the House for warmly welcoming my wife and I to these islands and for their role in creating a constructive working environment to help serve this territory. Over the last year, I have been greatly impressed by the Cayman Islands, its government, its civil service and its people, and I am proud to be your governor. I'm also grateful to those who have worked alongside me, including the excellent staff in my own office, towards a shared goal of ensuring that the Cayman Islands enjoy governance and administration that is worthy of its people. I will continue to do my utmost to support the prosperity and security of these islands, not least at a time of change and uncertainty as the UK has elections on the 12th of December and continues to navigate a complicated exit from the European Union. Let me make special mention of the Ministry of Finance and all other staff who have worked tirelessly for months to ensure these budget meetings are a success. Like all of you, I am excited to see what is next for these islands, and I am confident about the future. And I look forward to working with all of you to ensure that Caymanians and all residents on the islands enjoy enhanced prosperity and security. Thank you, and may God bless the Cayman Islands. For you.
The Assembly is in session. Please be seated.
Vote of thanks to His Excellency, the Governor.
Honorable colleagues, this Honorable Legislative Assembly does record its grateful thanks to His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Martin Keith Roper, OBE, for the gracious address delivered at this sitting.
Motion to defer debate on the throne speech.
No, is it? No, is that a question? He just like him. Yeah.
Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that debate on the gracious address from the throne just delivered by His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Martin Keith Roper, OBE, be deferred until Wednesday, the 13th of November.
Question is, be it resolved that the debate on the address delivered by His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Martin Keith Roper, OBE, be deferred until Wednesday, 13th of November, 2019. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Presentation of papers and of reports.
The Honorable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the following documents with respect to the Government's 2020 and 2021 financial years. The planning estimates for the Government of the Cayman Islands, budget statements for ministries, portfolios and offices, purchase agreements for statutory authorities, government companies and non-governmental output suppliers, and ownership agreements for statutory authorities and government companies.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking at this point?
Mr. Speaker, when you invite me to speak on the second reading of the appropriation bill later today, my budget address on the bill will refer to the details that are contained in the documents that I have just labeled. There's no need for me to speak at this time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Statements by the Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my honor and privilege on behalf of the government that I have the honor to lead, to deliver the government's budget policy statement for the years 2020, 2021, entitled Delivering Today's Priorities, Meeting Tomorrow's Challenges. Mr. Speaker, I would like to start by thanking His Excellency the Governor for his gracious speech from the throne. The formality of the occasion is important to us inside this House and the country outside. It connects us back in a very real way to the United Kingdom and serves as a crucial reminder of the close and mutually beneficial relationship our two nations enjoy. I would also like to thank His Excellency for the support he has given me and the government during his first year of service. As everyone here is aware, this is not an easy time to take on the role of governor, but I believe the professionalism and personal integrity that underpins our governor's approach can only help our country as we navigate these difficult times. Mr. Speaker, alongside the throne speech, the debate on the government's budget policy statement and the Appropriations bill that the Minister of Finance will speak to later offers the House the opportunity to debate the government's proposed budget and policy approach for the period from 1st of January 2020 to 31st December 2021. As is usual, there is a vast amount of detailed information to get through during the debate, and the relevant documentation, which I think is about 1 foot high, is now before honorable members. Mr. Speaker, at more than US $2 billion, this is the biggest budget in the history of the Cayman Islands, spanning the 2-year budget cycle. Mr. Speaker, the 8th of November, this day, seems a fortuitous date for me to rise to deliver my final budget policy statement as Premier. For it was 19 years ago this very day that I was first elected to this House. Mr. Speaker, all of us in this House will likely recall how easy it is in the aftermath of an election campaign to get caught up in the thrill of victory, even while acknowledging those amongst us who are dealing with the agony of defeat. That heady feeling of victory after a tough political campaign is something you don't easily forget. I remember well such a moment 19 years ago when I was celebrating with my mentor and running mate, the Honorable D. Kurt Tibbetts, who is here with us today, who had also won his seat again. Those of you who have had the privilege of working alongside Kurt will remember the lessons that he taught us all about being a good representative of the people. And so, Mr. Speaker, as Kurt and I celebrated, a young man sheepishly approached us and said good night to his not yet sworn in Georgetown representatives, and started to speak with us about his particular situation and concerns. Mr. Speaker, after all these years, I still remember the smile that crossed Kurt's face when he said to the young man, "My colleague, Mr. McLaughlin, will advise you." And he turned to me and said, "MLA Alden McLaughlin, your work begins tonight." Then he patted me on the back and left me listening to my young constituent. I was not yet sworn in, and though my celebrating was short-lived, the start of the work I would carry forward for the next 19 years had indeed begun. I also recall my feelings when I subsequently entered this chamber for the first time as the second elected member for Georgetown. I confess to feeling a little pride in my joining this esteemed body of legislators, but I was also humbled by the faith shown in me by the 2,057 electors who had cast their ballots for me that very first time. Above all, what I felt was a determination to do my best to deliver real improvements in the quality of life, not just for the 2,057 people who had voted for me, but for all the people of the District of Georgetown and these islands more generally. I have no idea whether the young man who spoke with me that election night so long ago voted for me or not. It did not matter. I was his representative. Mr. Speaker, that determination remains. In the last 19 years, I've had the privilege to serve our people in a number of different capacities, including as leader of the opposition. But the most fulfilling and challenging political role has been the last 6.5 years as Premier. And I often joke, Mr. Speaker, that if you can do this job, you can do anything. It has required me to stride an international stage, appearing on BBC's Hard Talk television interview program and providing a keynote address at Chatham House in London, negotiating with the EU over financial services issues, engaging partners in CARICOM to win their support for a stand in defense of our financial services industry, negotiating with the UK government to press the case for Cayman to be able to chart its own economic and political future, and even recently leading a government and private sector delegation to Monaco to further encourage trade and business links between Cayman and the Principality. I can honestly say, Mr. Speaker, that 19 years ago, I did not envisage myself doing any of those things. But I have been willing to undertake those tasks and more because they are necessary things for a premier to do. In promoting the Cayman Islands, we need to be prepared to take our case wherever we need to go. As Cayman becomes more confident in itself and develops more capability to promote these islands and our interest overseas, then I suspect that whoever follows me as Premier will need to be willing to engage in even more of that kind of activity. Wherever the role has taken me, however, Mr. Speaker, and whatever the task at hand, I have always at heart been a community politician. I understand the need for an international perspective, but I have always retained a focus on our community at home. You see, Mr. Speaker, I understand the need to engage foreign governments and foreign leaders, but I have always recognized that as politicians and representatives, we must engage our own people. I also understand the need for government to have vision and to build a prosperous future, but I've always also understood that jam tomorrow is of no use for folks who have no bread today. It is not, though, Mr. Speaker, a choice between the need to address present concerns and the need to plan for the future. Government cannot ignore the need to take a longer-term internationalist perspective any more than it can ignore the immediate needs of our people. We have to do both of those things. And this has been my approach since becoming Premier in 2013. So that, Mr. Speaker, is the underlying theme of the budget that the unity government is bringing to the House today. It is about continuing to build a strong Cayman by meeting today's needs and building for tomorrow. In putting this budget together, we have also had one other goal in mind, and that is to finish what we have started. This unity government set out on an ambitious program for the country, building on the platform created by the previous Progressives-led administration. We are determined to deliver on the commitments we gave, and this budget ensures that the resources are there to complete the key projects that make up our ambitious program. Setting out to deliver a program is a key task for any government, but no government can foresee what will happen over the course of a 4-year term. So a wise government does not just stick to its plans, it is prepared to respond as circumstances change. That, Mr. Speaker, is leadership. And that is the leadership that I and the governments that I have led these past 6.5 years have shown. This is a government prepared to respond. Each budget process gives us the opportunity to prioritize scarce resources to meet the changing needs of our people, and so we have done that, Mr. Speaker. As the member for Prospect so eloquently reminded the House only last week, the immediate priority for many people in our communities, certainly in the south and east of Grand Cayman, is traffic. Members who represent those communities probably receive as many complaints as I do about the need for road improvements, and I'm sure that they will be pleased to see the actions being taken for which money is being appropriated in this budget. The government has not, though, Mr. Speaker, waited for the budget before taking action. We have been able to get work underway now that will be completed in the months ahead, utilizing the new resources from the budget before the House today. Honorable members will be aware of what is already being done to increase capacity and to smooth traffic flow at critical junctions. I was very pleased last month to be able to visit the works now underway in Red Bay and Prospect with the Minister for Infrastructure, and I would like to thank him for the positive and proactive way he and the NRA, under new chairmanship, have responded to the problems being experienced. Of course, Mr. Speaker, I am now getting complaints about the roadworks themselves, but I guess that is inevitable. What I can reassure commuters is that the roadworks now underway will make a significant difference to traffic as it moves from the east towards town in the morning peak and back again in the evening. The work on the expansion to the Red Bay roundabout to increase it to 3 lanes began last month and should be completed by Christmas, and is the first vital junction improvement in the chain. The NRA has also begun work to create the necessary third lane at the Grand Harbor roundabout. Initially, this extra capacity will be utilized as a filter lane for traffic entering the roundabout from South Sun Road. However, as other improvements come on stream, the extra lane will facilitate better traffic flow in both directions between the CUC roundabout at King's Sports Center and the Chrissy Tomlinson roundabout. That roundabout will be upgraded alongside the addition of 2 new lanes at Rex Crichton Boulevard between the Poindexter roundabout and the Chrissy Tomlinson roundabout. These and associated improvements, such as the new layout of Shamrock Road, will add much needed capacity, which will reduce congestion and delays and improve commuting times. While these benefits, Mr. Speaker, will be felt by drivers in the early part of next year, I am afraid the relief will be short-lived unless more is done. The reality is that Cayman's economic growth is continuing to increase our population, and relative prosperity is compounding that with increased car ownership. As I signaled in my strategic policy statement address back in April, the budget reflects this government's determination to act. Mr. Speaker, we have brought forward planned improvements in the island's strategic road network to give a significant increase in capacity from the eastern districts through to join up with the improvements currently underway and on into Georgetown. The planned extension of the east-west arterial road, first to northward and then through to Lookout in Bordentown, has been brought forward into this budget period rather than being left until the next, as had originally been planned. This means, Mr. Speaker, we will be able to deliver the most significant increase in the carrying capacity of the road network east of Georgetown in at least a decade. Mr. Speaker, I hope that you will forgive me for speaking at such length about issues that have little to do with West Bay. However, I am sure that every member in this House will have heard their constituents voicing concerns about the cost of living. The good residents of West Bay, no doubt, will be as interested as others across these islands to hear how the government plans to respond to those particular concerns. The Minister of Finance has explained before that there is little that the government can do in a systematic way to address the cost of living. We lack the usual instruments of monetary policy that other governments with different tax structures rely upon in these circumstances. Moreover, our almost total reliance on imports means that we can never be isolated from economic conditions elsewhere, especially in the United States, but also in global markets more generally. If we lack the tools for an economy-wide response, Mr. Speaker, then government must look instead for a more targeted approach. The biggest single factor by far impacting the cost of living in the Cayman Islands now is housing. We have all seen, Mr. Speaker, the clear indications of both the increasing cost of home ownership and the escalating costs of rents that are directly impacting Caymanians and residents. While the property market and the rental market are linked, there are also different dynamics at play within each. Home ownership is a dream to which all Caymanians aspire, and justifiably so, Mr. Speaker. This government believes that if you work hard and save responsibly, then it should not be a dream beyond your reach. And yet, that is the position in which many young Caymanian families find themselves. Such is the strength of the property market in our islands that those Caymanians with property are able to sell at an exceptionally good price. However, Caymanians seeking to buy can find themselves effectively priced out of that market. Mr. Speaker, we are not a do-nothing government that is willing to shrug our shoulders and say, well, that is how markets work. No, Mr. Speaker, such an approach is not acceptable to this government, which is why we have supported the work of the National Housing Development Trust in building affordable homes, as well as reduced stamp duty for first-time Caymanian home buyers. In the coming budget period, we have put in place a number of measures that will help further bring home ownership within the reach of more young Caymanian families. First, Mr. Speaker, the budget provides for the full effect of the stamp duty concession we have put in place for first-time Caymanian buyers. This allows homes up to $400,000 to be purchased by first-time Caymanian homeowners stamp duty-free. That concession makes a significant difference to the amount of cash needed when making a purchase and has the knock-on effect of making the necessary deposit easier for young Caymanians to put together. Mr. Speaker, based on a 7.5% stamp duty, this amounts to a savings of $30,000 for a $400,000 property. This policy change is already proving effective, and many Caymanian families have already benefited from it. In this budget, we're extending this provision so that for all Caymanians wishing to purchase a first home, the first $400,000 will be duty-free, regardless of the value of the home. This extends the duty reduction across the full range of likely first-time buyer properties in Cayman. It brings the benefit to more Caymanian first-time buyers, as the $30,000 saving will now apply to all properties. Legislation will be needed to effect this change, and we will bring that forward to the House as quickly as possible so as not to create any problems in the market pending the change. We will keep the duty-free threshold under review, and we are willing to consider further concessions in favor of aspiring and hard-working Caymanians if we deem it necessary. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we will reinvigorate other programs that support Caymanians wanting to own their own home. In past years, over 300 families have been assisted by the Government Guaranteed Home Assisted Mortgage Program, or GGHAM for short. This program, run in conjunction with participating local banks, provides the lending institution with a government guarantee of up to 35% of the mortgage amount. This covers the required down payment as well as provides some additional risk protection for the bank. Historically, this program has been very successful with negligible levels of default. Mr. Speaker, we shall also look again at the Build on Your Own Property program to help those individuals who own their land but need some help qualifying for a mortgage. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, we are continuing to support the work of the National Housing Development Trust. I have said in this chamber before that the trust has been reinvigorated under this government. New build projects have been delivered in Bordentown and East End. Currently, there are schemes awaiting planning permission to deliver more affordable units in both East End and West Bay. These affordable homes built by the trust represent an important route to home ownership for Caymanian families, and I look forward to the trust bringing to fruition their plans for the 24-acre site they have acquired in Georgetown. This budget continues the government's funding commitment in terms of meeting the ongoing financing costs of the trust's work. But, Mr. Speaker, we cannot simply rely on the good work of the trust to meet a growing need among Caymanians while developers build more and more housing units aimed exclusively at the luxury end of the market. To be fair, there is an economic logic compelling developers to act in this way, so government will work with them to look, for example, at how we might encourage them to deliver more affordable homes for Caymanians. Rents are an issue across the economy, but there are particular issues impacting the lower end of the market, including for families seeking housing assistance through the Needs Assessment Unit. We need to work with potential landlords to look at ways government might approach the market differently in order to encourage more supply. Government will also commence discussions with the Housing Development Trust about the possibility of renovating or redeveloping some existing government-owned properties and bringing them back to the rental market. Mr. Speaker, while housing costs are the most significant factor impacting the cost of living, there are, of course, other issues at play. Prices of imported goods are also an issue. And that does allow me once again to draw the straight line and obvious link to the importance of the proposed cargo port enhancements. Greater volumes, new routes, and more efficient operations will reduce the cost of imports, period. Relying on the current inefficient operation as we continue to grow not only drives up cost, but increasingly becomes untenable. Mr. Speaker, certainly the people in the community I represent still tell me that they believe the cost of gas at the pumps in Cayman is unreasonably high. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that at long last, OFREG has now appointed consultants to look at the operation of the fuel market in Cayman. While all my instincts believe in markets, Mr. Speaker, if that review finds that the fuel market here is not operating fairly in the interest of Caymanians and residents, then there will have to be a change. If fuel supply companies are not willing to respond positively, then, as I've said before, the government will intervene if necessary. Mr. Speaker, as well as particular categories of cost, we also need to look at the question of whether the relatively high cost of living is having a disproportionately greater impact on some parts of the community. Here, the evidence suggests that in Cayman, costs are having the greatest impact on older persons, particularly those with fixed incomes that do not increase as their household bills go up. The budget before the House addresses that issue, and the government is announcing today a package of concessions designed to reduce the costs falling on older persons. Across government, some 14 fees or duties will be significantly reduced or waived for persons over the age of 65. The package includes reductions in vehicle licensing fees, duty reductions for mobility scooters and wheelchairs, and reduced post office box rental fees. My own ministry will reduce work permit fees for caregivers of older persons, and we will reduce import duties for older persons coming through the airport. The impact of these changes will obviously vary from individual to individual, but the concessions generally focus on those in greatest need. We calculate that the revenue foregone by government will total approximately $830,000. Mr. Speaker, prices are only one side of the cost of living equation. The other, of course, is income. Here, government does have some more direct tools at its disposal. Again, we are taking action, and once more the focus is on providing support for those in greatest need. The first budget announced by this unity government increased the guaranteed minimum income payment for seafarers, veterans, those in need of social assistance, and long-serving civil service pensioners to $750 per month from its previous level of just $550. I am delighted to announce today, Mr. Speaker, that this budget has again provided for more support for these groups of people, and that from the 1st of January 2020, they will see their monthly income rise by another $100 per month to $850. We will go further, Mr. Speaker, and the budget provides for a further $100 per month from January 2021, lifting the monthly payment to $950. This means that under this government, there will have been an increase of at least 73% in the income of over 2,000 of Cayman's most vulnerable and hard-pressed households. This government pledged to support the most vulnerable in our communities, and we are delivering on that promise. I would like to thank the member for Prospect, who is my counselor for community affairs, for the excellent work he does for the ministry. Mr. Speaker, carrying 3 ministries plus the role of Premier, I simply could not do it without his assistance. Mr. Speaker, the flexibility of Cayman's labor market means that wage levels tend to lag behind growth and productivity. This, of course, was one of the major reasons why my previous administration introduced the country's first national minimum wage. The minimum wage is now under review. And before I get howls of protest from business leaders, I just want to recall, Mr. Speaker, the controversy that accompanied the original decision to introduce the minimum wage. And yet, growth has continued, and thousands of jobs for Caymanians have been created. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I hope the experts leading the review will look at the opportunity for an increase in real terms in the national minimum wage. In the meantime, government will continue to do its part. Mr. Speaker, during my delivery of the strategic policy statement earlier this year, I indicated then that we had mostly corrected the wage concerns of civil servants, in particular with regard to wage stagnation and income loss during recession-related austerity measures. But I also referred then to the higher prices in the shops. In the run-up to the SPS and in the months since I have had several conversations with the Deputy Governor regarding civil service wages. Another announcement I am therefore making today is that in putting together this budget, the government has allowed for a 5% cost of living increase for civil servants with effect from 1st of January 2020. The government believes that the hard work and dedication to public service shown by civil servants should not be taken for granted, and we are providing for this increase in recognition of the contributions civil servants make every day to the well-being of this country and its people. We all on these benches appreciate and value their service and the sacrifices many of them make each day. Mr. Speaker, this increase will also have an influence on the wider labor market. It acts as a signal to private sector employers and as a stimulus to wage growth elsewhere in the economy. Wage increases for public service employees, however desirable, are only appropriate if they are affordable to the public purse. And so the pay rise I am announcing today will be offset by efficiencies and other savings made elsewhere in the budget. In that way, we intend that the cost of living increase we are announcing should be self-financing. I am very grateful to the Deputy Governor and his Chief Officer team for the positive approach they have taken in committing to find the measures necessary to fund the pay increase. Mr. Speaker, it is striking that both of the issues I have mentioned so far today, traffic problems and the cost of living, are problems created by success. I sometimes refer to them as growing pains. That does not make them any less important to deal with, but I would much rather be contemplating those issues than the problems of recession and hardship that we inherited when I was sworn in as Premier in 2013. Just reflect for a moment, Mr. Speaker, on how far this country has come in these last 6.5 years. Real terms, GDP growth has been consistent and strong, averaging 3% throughout the period. Unemployment has dropped, and in particular, Caymanian unemployment has fallen from a peak of 10.5% immediately prior to us coming into office in 2013, and has now been pegged at 4.8% in the most recent labor force survey. As I've said before in this House, there are now 3,300 more Caymanians in employment than there were 6.5 years ago. There is every reason to be confident that this track record of success will be maintained through the end of this term. The economic prosperity that these Cayman Islands have built and then enjoyed during the two administrations that I have had the honor to lead is a singular achievement. All of us, Mr. Speaker, can be proud of the strong Caymanian economy that we have built together. Problems relating to traffic and to the cost of living are things we can deal with, and we are doing so. But I fear that there is another problem we face that may be much harder to tackle. That is a growing sense of complacency and an assumption, even by some members in this House, Mr. Speaker, that Cayman can continue to prosper by right rather than by dint of hard work. I beg to differ, Mr. Speaker. The history of the last 60 years tells me that it is only because Caymanians have been willing to lead the way, to develop a business-friendly environment, and to take risks that we have grown and prospered as a people. Rather than sitting back with a self-satisfied sigh and expecting the dollars to continue to flow in, now is the time for us to bend our backs and lay the foundations for the next generation of Caymanian success. Now, I recognize, Mr. Speaker, that it will be for a future government and the next Premier to pick up the challenge. But as I said earlier, I came into politics to do the right thing for Cayman and my people. I will end my time as Premier doing the right thing. That means that even though it will not be for me to see all the plans through, I do believe it is the task of this administration to sow the seeds that the next administration will reap. Therefore, our plans for the coming budget period include several key pieces of work to position the Cayman Islands for the future. I should add here, though, Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure you would expect me to do, that I fully expect the next government to be a record third-straight Progressives-led administration. I also fully expect, Mr. Speaker, that the government will be able to continue with you in the Speaker's chair, carrying on the good work you have done over the course of this term.
That's a very pregnant idea.
But whatever the verdict of the people in May 2021, the next government will come into office with the benefit of a number of initiatives already underway for them to pick up and complete or to mold in the light of their own political mandate. I want to take this opportunity to highlight 4 important issues on which Cayman needs to begin to think differently. 2 of them I've mentioned already: traffic and housing. The other 2 are healthcare and economic diversification. Do not get me wrong, Mr. Speaker, I am not just kicking the can down the road on those issues in the hope that a future administration will deal with them. Rather, I recognize that it is just not possible in the next 18 months or so to fully solve the challenges we now face. But neither is it the case that we have been doing nothing about these issues for the last 6 years. In all 4 cases, there is action the government has already taken and is taking in the short term through the next budget period, as I've already indicated. In my view, however, the experience of the last 2 administrations indicates we now need to lift our eyes from the kind of pragmatic solutions we have already delivered and address these issues in a more fundamental way. This government will rise to that challenge, and the budget also includes resources to fund the work we are putting in train now to help to identify longer-term solutions. Traffic is a very good example of that. I've already highlighted the huge amount of work that will take place over the next budget period to improve the capacity of Cayman's road network. It will, as I've said, reduce congestion and improve journey times, especially at peak times. But unless we do more, Cayman's victory over its traffic problems will be short-lived. All the evidence from across the world is that you add more road capacity, it just fills up with more vehicles. In the longer term, we need a different answer. In fact, I believe we need a different question. Not what is the right solution to Cayman's traffic problems, but what is the best solution for Cayman's future transportation needs. If we act now, there is an important opportunity to answer that question in a new and innovative way. The extraordinary growth Cayman has experienced over the last 60 years, plus the continued growth in visitor numbers, means we are now of a size where new public transport solutions become economically viable. At the same time, although we have grown, we still have the physical space to implement an innovative and different solution. However, the challenge is not simply an infrastructure one. It also involves a change in our behaviors, enticing people out of their cars to use public transport options as they become more readily available. Neither the infrastructure development nor the behavior change can be delivered in the next 18 months. But we will use the time to work to identify what the best future option for Cayman might be. The Minister for Infrastructure, supported by the Deputy Premier, whose remit includes public transport, will commission a public transport study that will be ready to inform the choices to be made by the incoming government in 2021. Similarly, with housing, Mr. Speaker, the measures I spoke of earlier will have a positive impact, but the improvements will necessarily be limited in scope. The current operation of both the main property market and the rental market are moving in a direction that, if nothing is done, will increasingly make housing unaffordable for middle-class Caymanian families. As I said earlier, this is unacceptable. The issues right now are partly cyclical, but the country's continued economic success means the issue will just not go away. The longer-term trend, if Cayman continues to grow, is something that government needs to address and not in a piecemeal fashion. There are a variety of tools available to government, including planning policies, the use of government's own land, duty reductions and other concessions, and the potential to offer more direct support to Caymanian home buyers. Each of these, though, will not be an answer in isolation. Indeed, over-reliance on any single intervention is likely just to distort the markets. A comprehensive cross-government housing policy is required, and we are forming a special interministerial committee to develop that policy. I expect its report to be available in time to begin implementation through the 2022-2023 budget and beyond. The challenge to create new solutions for affordable housing in the context of successful economic growth is being met elsewhere, and we can learn from that experience. In California, for example, where the tech boom continues to generate tens of thousands of high-paying jobs, the median home price has risen by nearly 75%, and the average rent has gone up 40% over the last 7 years. On Monday this week, Apple announced it will direct $2.5 billion toward affordable housing initiatives in California, including helping first-time home buyers with financing and down payments. They join other technology companies, including Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, in pledging to help address the significant increases in rent and real estate prices caused in part by the technology industry's rapid expansion. Mr. Speaker, perhaps those who are profiting from bringing in large numbers of workers to Cayman can be encouraged to take a similar approach. In respect of healthcare, we have another issue with lots of moving parts that we need to consider as one system. Perhaps, as this is towards the end of my tenure as Premier, Mr. Speaker, I can speak with a bit more freedom. Frankly, in my view, the system we have developed in Cayman is becoming unsustainable. Health insurance costs are one of the factors driving the increasing cost of living. And yet, government is increasingly left to pick up the tab for those who find that they cannot afford to participate in a private insurance-based system. That cost is escalating. For what I think is the first time, this budget contains a more accurate estimate of the likely cost of caring for seafarers, veterans, and medical indigents. We have allocated approximately $26 million per year to cover that cost in each of the next 2 years. This and previous governments have sought to make incremental changes. My government has tried to find a solution to older persons' insurance coverage, the cost that is, but the business cases we were presented, simply, Mr. Speaker, were unaffordable. Both administrations have considered whether Synico is still the right model for Cayman going forward. The ongoing review of Synico we have commissioned explores viable options which will enable the company to become financially sustainable, be fit for purpose, and to offer affordable insurance products and services to the government and the citizens of the Cayman Islands. The HSA is extending services and improving access, for example, through the proposed new health center for Bordentown, and this is to be welcomed. At the same time, we have excellent private sector provision of health services on island, but there is limited cooperation between providers. I must accept, Mr. Speaker, that this is one area of public policy where successive governments have failed to get to grips with the issue. Indeed, I have spoken of this before. The incremental approaches we have reached for have proven illusory. It is my belief that a more radical approach is called for. Central to that needs to be a new role for government in helping to support the health and well-being of our people rather than just dealing with sickness. We need to adopt a much more preventive strategy and to organize services that keep people healthier for longer. This is better for government and better for people. The logic of an insurance system should support that approach, but the relatively small size of insurance pools and the lack of engagement between them and health service providers militates against it. While I envisage a new role for government, this is not a question that politicians alone can solve. We need a wider debate on how we should reform and pay for a health system, and we need that debate to be well informed about the costs, benefits, and risks of different approaches. The first task for government, then, is to gather the necessary information and carry out the analysis to facilitate that national debate. And once the analysis is done and the debate complete, there is need for suitable action. The last of the 4 issues I want to tackle in this section of my speech, Mr. Speaker, is Cayman's continuing economic diversification. This has been and will continue to be a government that believes in opportunities for Caymanians. I will talk in more detail later about the work we are doing in education, in employment, and in the small business environment to support Caymanian opportunity. But whatever we do, there needs to be in place a thriving economy in which those opportunities arise in the first place. Put another way, Mr. Speaker, those who believe that we should focus on education alone and not also on keeping the economy thriving are suggesting a strategy that will result in merely creating educated people who cannot find jobs. Cayman's success as a tourism destination and as an international financial services center is something we should all be proud of. This government is certainly doing all it can to ensure the continued success of Cayman in both of those sectors, as I shall talk about later. However, that is not enough. Again, recent governments, including this one, have begun to work to diversify our economic base. In part, that is a response to threats and to risks, particularly in respect of financial services. However, it is also about opportunity. Cayman is at its best when it innovates, both through the entrepreneurialism of Caymanians and through a willingness to work positively with the diversity of talent from overseas. Cayman has been able to develop new and exciting products and services that attract business to these small islands. Ours has been a kind of pioneer spirit, and yet, in respect to financial services at least, that spirit has become less adventurous. In some ways, that is a good thing because it has allowed the legal and regulatory frameworks necessary in modern financial centers to catch up and then keep pace. But I believe that the Caymanian pioneer spirit is still alive and well. The question then becomes, where is the new frontier where that spirit can now be applied? This is the key question that we have not really answered in our efforts to diversify the Cayman economy. So to take us forward, this budget for the first time creates an appropriation for the new Ministry of International Trade and Investment, Aviation, and Maritime Affairs. The role of this ministry is outward-facing, presenting a single front door to potential investors in Cayman and ensuring that the jurisdiction is effectively plugged in to key existing and emerging markets. To undertake that role effectively, the ministry has to work across government and hand in glove with the Cayman private sector. As such, it can be the focal point for future efforts to diversify our economy and to create new opportunities that channel that pioneer spirit of Caymanian enterprise. In this next budget period, the ministry is rather dipping its toe in these waters. We are deliberately starting relatively small. However, if the ministry is as successful as I believe it can be, then it will grow to be the powerhouse for the next iteration of the Cayman economic miracle. While it is important for us to create a platform for the future, the people have every right to demand of this government that we should finish what we started. Right across government, in each of our ministries, we will double down on our efforts to deliver on the promises this government gave to the people of the Cayman Islands. We have achieved a lot over the last 2.5 years. I spoke at length during the SPS debate about this administration's achievements, and I will not repeat it today. However, as we discussed the priorities for this budget in the government caucus, I could not help but be impressed and encouraged by the determination my colleagues are showing to get critical projects over the line. The most obvious symbol of that determination to carry through on our promises is the new cruise berthing and enhanced cargo facilities. As I said in the referendum bill debate last week, this government was democratically elected with a clear mandate to get both elements of this vitally important project delivered. Having spent 3 days in the chamber last week debating the issue, I will not go over the same old ground again. We are here today to debate the budget, and it is worth recording that beyond the enabling works, there are no new resources in this budget to deliver the port redevelopment project. That is, of course, one of the most important achievements of the government. There is no need to appropriate funding of some $200 million for building the port project because the Cayman Islands is not paying for it. The cruise companies will pay for all of the capital costs and then recover their investment and pay for the maintenance and upkeep of the new facilities from the per passenger levy on cruise passengers. I repeat, Mr. Speaker, it will be paid for by the cruise passengers and not the people of these islands. That is a fact, Mr. Speaker, no matter who says anything different in whatever way they may say it. In the words of the great Churchill, the truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. Mr. Speaker, I will not repeat last week's debate, but I will pause to recognize what an outstanding achievement it is to have put Cayman in this position. You see, Mr. Speaker, we want the experience for our cruise visitors to be as wonderful as it is for our visitors who arrive by plane. While the upgrades to the Owen Roberts International Airport have brought improvements for the flying public, we will soon see further improvements to the airfield. Works will be done on the apron rehabilitation and extension of the runway to make the airport more efficient and expedite departures and landings. Accordingly, I want to offer my thanks to the Deputy Premier and Minister for Tourism for his leadership on behalf of the government in moving the port redevelopment project forwards. I've had the privilege to have had him as my deputy for the last 6.5 years, and it has been my honor to serve with him. I have valued his support and welcomed his counsel. The last year has been a very difficult time personally for the Deputy Premier and his family. And as if that were not enough, he has had to suffer personal attacks and efforts to impugn his honesty. Yet he has remained steadfast in his determination to carry through what he knows to be right for our country, and he has continued to operate with a combination of integrity and good humor that we all know to be his trademark. I truly thank him for all that he has done to move forward this government's agenda for the benefit of all the people of our islands. I also thank his councillor and member for Georgetown West for his commitment and dedication to the work of that important ministry. Mr. Speaker, whilst we have had challenges locally moving forward with our cruise berthing and enhanced cargo port, we are also experiencing challenges internationally with regard to defending and promoting our key financial services industry. Mr. Speaker, I do appreciate very much the company of the Minister for Financial Services, but both of us have spent far too many hours in London, Brussels, and other European capitals dealing with the plethora of issues our industry faces. That challenge continues. The Minister has been working hard with her team and with the industry itself to make sure that we keep pace with the ever-changing demands of the international regulatory bodies. I am very grateful to the Minister for all that she has done to put Cayman in such a strong position to avoid us being placed on a blacklist. The budget we are bringing before the House today provides yet more resources to aid in meeting that challenge. I've said many times before that Cayman will comply with all relevant international standards, and we need to invest in both people and new technology in response to increasing international regulatory developments, the variety of international assessments, and the competitive pressures that Cayman faces. The investments being made through this budget will enable Cayman to increase in regulatory capacity and, where appropriate, to take any necessary regulatory action. We will also further boost our engagement with international stakeholders as we run a new campaign to address the very widespread misconceptions about Cayman and to improve the global reputation of the jurisdiction. While we may differ, Mr. Speaker, on the cruise and cargo port project, I do hope all members of this House will support the government's promotion of our financial services industry and be willing to campaign with us as we seek to enhance our reputation and promote a positive image of our country overseas. Mr. Speaker, this budget provides the resources to complete a number of initiatives the government has been putting in place to support small business and create new opportunities for Caymanian entrepreneurs. As the Minister of Commerce has announced, the new Small Business Development Center will open its doors before the end of the year. The budget we are proposing today ensures the resources are there to ratchet up the services available and extend the reach of the center during the first few months of 2020. Other actions from across government will provide further support. For example, the Post Office will develop and launch a second tier of its Caymankind Global Flat Rate products, which support small and micro businesses operating in the island's e-commerce market, as well as being beneficial to individual customers. Mr. Speaker, I think it is the case that we have been working on the integrated solid waste management project, or to put it more plainly, on fixing the dump, even longer than we have on the procurement process for the port project. There have been times during the last 6.5 years, when it felt like we were never going to get there. So it is with some relief that we are now seeing increasing confidence in the delivery of the project. But even after 2 years or more, we still have further negotiations to conclude with the DART-led consortium, which is the preferred bidder for the project. And that is reflected in the budget before the House. Were I superstitious, Mr. Speaker, I would be touching wood as I say this, but the main challenges in taking the project forward are resolved, and it is on that basis that both parties have now begun to work together in concrete terms while the contract negotiations are being concluded. There will shortly begin a consultation on the terms of reference for an environmental impact assessment for the new facilities to be constructed on the project, including the waste-to-energy plant. Even more significantly, work will begin on capping the existing landfill early in the new year. Equally important, Mr. Speaker, last month I was delighted to attend the groundbreaking for the new long-term residential mental health facility that is being built in East End, following the formal signing of the contracts to construct the facility. This will be a purpose-built 54-bed facility that will serve the residents of the Cayman Islands who have serious and persistent medical illness, enabling them to receive high-quality care close to their homes, friends, and family, rather than having to travel overseas. It is envisaged that the new facility will open in the second quarter of 2021. The budget provides the capital allocations for the building of the new facility and covers the operating costs through to the end of the budget period. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Health inherited both of these projects from my previous administration, but he has adopted them as his own and driven them forward with a relentless determination. I confessed earlier that my own confidence wavered as both of these projects hit various setbacks, but the Minister retained that determination and was able to assure both myself and our caucus colleagues that both could be delivered. I thank him today for his hard work and fortitude. I must also thank, Mr. Speaker, his very able and committed councillor, the member for West Bay Central. Mr. Speaker, President Lyndon Johnson frequently summarized his commitment to civil rights and the Great Society in the following terms, and I quote, "It is not enough just to open the gates of opportunity. All of our citizens must have the ability to walk through those gates," unquote. These words also get to the heart of the commitment that the last two administrations have made in terms of opportunity for Caymanians. Much has been achieved, and this budget provides the resources to push our work forwards still further. In terms of opening doors, the overriding priority over the last 6.5 years has been to ensure Caymanians could access employment. I reported earlier on our track record that has seen Caymanian unemployment halved over the period. That success means that 3,300 more Caymanians are now in employment compared to when we took office. I think we can now say that we are getting to the point where there is effectively full Caymanian employment. But we will not give up on any Caymanians still seeking employment, and we stand ready to support all Caymanians. Moreover, we must recognize that this nation's hard-won success is always fragile. External economic shocks and natural disasters are always risks in our economy. That is why the government has not wavered in its commitment to continuing to grow the economy. Our success now also gives us the opportunity to broaden our focus. From a position of strength where Caymanians are more readily able to access employment, we can now redouble our efforts to ensure that there are proper opportunities for advancement in our economy. As I said in my speech to the House introducing the SPS, we will be legislating to create a new Fair Employment Opportunities Commission. The Ministry is in receipt of the initial draft bill and has been researching similar such commissions in other jurisdictions to provide further drafting instructions to legislative drafting. It is anticipated that the bill will be submitted to the House within the first quarter of the new year to provide for public consultation. The Commission will work across the whole economy and be empowered to look at the treatment of Caymanians in all sectors and all levels. If there are barriers to the advancement of Caymanians, it will be the Commission's role to ensure they are eliminated. In this way, Mr. Speaker, we will be increasingly confident that the gates of opportunity are truly open to Caymanians. As the economy grows and diversifies, the demands for labor will change. Looking ahead, we need to ensure that Caymanians have the skills necessary to access the opportunities of the future. Our design of the new Department of Workforce Opportunities and Residency Cayman has for the first time created within government the capacity to look ahead and to plan the workforce development necessary to equip Caymanians for the future jobs market. The coming budget period will see that new function beginning to operate effectively. The real key to ensuring that Caymanians are able to walk through the gates of opportunity is to ensure that our education system equips our young people with the skills they need to compete in the increasingly complex jobs market they will face. Significant progress has already been made, Mr. Speaker. The work done in the last administration to create a new framework for education and to base our plans on a realistic appraisal of the current position of our schools meant that this term we have been able to focus on pushing forward with a meaningful program to reform the public education system in Cayman. That program has been well thought through and systematically deployed. I will accept the recent criticism of our Auditor General that we have not paused long enough in our delivery of the necessary changes to write it all down. But our strategic intent has been clear. Reading the Auditor General's criticisms, I'm reminded of a letter written by the Duke of Wellington in 1812 as his army chased Napoleon out of Portugal and Spain. In response to the repeated Foreign Office requests that he account for his actions and the deployment of his troops, the Duke wrote, quote, "This brings me to my present purpose, which is to request elucidation of my instructions from His Majesty's government, so that I may better understand why I'm dragging an army over these barren plains. I construe that perforce it must be one of two alternative duties, as given below. I shall pursue either with the best of my ability, but I cannot do both. One, to train an army of uniformed British clerks in Spain for the benefit of the accountants and corporate boys in London, or perchance, two, to see to it the forces of Napoleon are driven out of Spain. Your most obedient servant, Wellington." Mr. Speaker, this government has made clear how we see our present duty, Mr. Speaker, and that is to drive forward the improvement of public schools in Cayman. I want to express my gratitude to the Minister for Education for her leadership of the reform program and her dedication to ensuring that our education system delivers opportunities for all our young people. I also thank the member for Georgetown South and Councillor for Education for her commitment not just to educate our young people, but also for the care she gives to the elderly in her community. Mr. Speaker, the first stage has been to get the basics right. The biggest single contributor to improving standards of education is to improve the quality of teaching. This budget completes the commitment we made to increase teachers' salaries to a monthly minimum of $5,000 so as to attract and retain the best in the profession. We are continuing to invest in the development of our teachers and the quality of our school leaders. Across the country, school inspectors are now finding improvements in the quality of teaching, and their overall assessments of schools' performance are moving in the right direction. The second stage is to ensure that what is being taught by our high-quality teachers is appropriate for young people. This term has seen a new curriculum introduced into Cayman's primary schools. Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is more challenging, and I hear some of the complaints. And yes, there will be difficulties as we all adjust to the demands of the new curriculum. But we will be failing another generation of Caymanians, young people, if we did not make this vital change. The budget before the House today provides the resources needed to support the successful rollout of the new curriculum across our public education system. While this challenging new curriculum will raise academic standards, we must also recognize that some of our young people will want to pursue other opportunities. For them, we need to ensure that appropriate technical and vocational routes are available to them. I will stress that vocational training is not to the exclusion of all academic education. In my view, vocational routes are themselves underpinned by a firm grasp of the basics, reading, writing, and mathematics. Beyond that, the best vocational routes are developed as partnerships between educators and the private sector. That is the approach this government is taking, and the coming budget period will bring that work to fruition. In the meantime, the government is extending its own efforts as an employer to deliver high-quality vocational training for a new generation of Caymanian tradespeople. Funding provided in the current budget is allowing the construction of a dedicated apprentice training facility at the Public Works compound and the upgrading of PWD's electrical, plumbing, AC, and carpentry workshops to make them suitable for apprentice training in addition to their normal work use. Currently, construction is on target for completion by December, with a facility opening and launch of Level 3 supervisory training in January of 2020. This coming budget allocates funding to support the continued development of PWD's apprenticeship program. By this time next year, the program will expand to 50 Caymanian apprentices in training, including customized classes for persons already working in the industry who need to be upskilled or certified in their particular area of expertise, or to access emerging opportunities within the sector. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we need to finish one piece of strategic reform that has been on hold while we have been rolling out the new curriculum. That reform is the introduction of new governance arrangements for Cayman's public schools. I said when speaking to the SPS that this reform was essential in placing responsibility for improvement where it really matters, with schools themselves. School governance arrangements that engage teachers, parents, and wider community in the running of local schools have been shown the world over to support school improvement, and this is the model Cayman needs to adopt. I will just pause here, Mr. Speaker, to say that I understand that when I spoke about these governance changes during the SPS debate, I upset some people by suggesting that decisions about what happens in classrooms were better taken by schools themselves rather than by the Department of Education Services. Mr. Speaker, I really can't apologize for that because I believe it to be true. However, I do apologize for what was left unsaid. Just as the change benefits schools by giving them the freedom locally to drive their own improvement, so it also frees the department to refocus its time on the key national programs that provide the necessary frameworks for local improvement. In my view, this change clarifies the role of both the schools themselves and the central department, and benefits both by allowing them to concentrate on the things that they are best placed to do. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that I haven't offended anyone again, and I have now made myself clear. Mr. Speaker, since I spoke on the SPS, the Education Council has been working on the development of the new governance model for Cayman schools. I thank them for the work they have done, and I look forward to supporting the Council and the Ministry as they put the changes in place during this two-year budget period. Alongside these vital changes in the education system, the government in this budget is continuing to invest in the necessary upgrading of the school's estate. The centerpiece of that program of capital investment is, of course, the new John Gray High School campus. Mr. Speaker, despite what some cynics in the blogosphere might have everyone believe, the John Gray High School project is progressing well. The last update I received that the target opening for the whole of the new facilities remains the start of the 2021 academic year, with the potential for some of the new facilities to come on stream before that date. Alongside the John Gray project, other capital investments programmed for the 2021 budget period include works to improve the primary school estate, most notably an upgraded hall at the Bordentown Primary School. Taken together, these investments both increase the capacity in Cayman's public schools to meet the demand for places and help to create the kind of positive learning environment that supports quality teaching and learning. On a related note, Mr. Speaker, this budget provides the financing to take forward the new Sunrise Adult Training Facility. I recognize that this is long overdue, but I'm delighted that it has now been possible to find the necessary resources. Again, Mr. Speaker, it is not just the new building itself that is important, welcome though I'm sure that will be. Within the building will be better, more modern equipment. Taken as a whole, the new facilities will greatly enhance the opportunities for training and personal development for up to 150 Caymanians with special needs. Mr. Speaker, the appropriations in the budget before the House also complete a number of important changes this government has been driving in order to reduce crime and ensure that Cayman is a safe place to live, work, visit, and do business. Before I do that, though, Mr. Speaker, I must just alert the House to a change in the way that the RCIPS appropriations are presented in this budget. There is a heading in the budget entitled Appropriations to the Premier on behalf of the Office of the Commissioner of Police, which is new. Previously, those appropriations had been shown within the Ministry of Employment and Border Control, for which I am responsible. The change of substance that lies behind this change in the tables in the budget book is that it effectively recognizes the RCIPS at the ministry level in government terms rather than at the department level. The consequence of this is that the Deputy Governor is inviting the Commissioner of Police to act as a chief officer and to be part of his formal leadership team. This will facilitate further integration of the activities of the RCIPS within other ministries for the benefit of the government-wide approach to keeping communities safer. I fully endorse the change. What the House will see within RCIPS allocations further underlines this government's commitment to providing the resources needed for the effective policing of these islands. The budget provides the funding necessary to complete the 3-year commitment we made to recruit 75 new police officers and to support the refocusing of policy onto a neighborhood approach. And just this month, Mr. Speaker, 11 community safety officers have been assigned to work in our communities. These officers aren't police officers, but civilian members of all our districts who patrol communities and identify areas and issues of concern while helping bridge the gap between the police and the community. The implementation of this new service, funded through the budget before the House, represents the delivery of yet another of the promises made by this government. These changes, plus other things such as the new RCIPS app, are bringing the police much closer to the communities they serve and ensuring that policing is much more responsive to the needs of the communities. Additional policing is continuing to help keep Cayman safe, Mr. Speaker. In April, I spoke about reductions in the burglary rate, and I'm pleased to say that current indications are of a continuing downward trend in serious crime across these islands. For example, the positive reduction in burglary rates has been carried on into this year. In 2017, the average burglary rate was around 42.5 per month. Last year's successes had brought that down to 27 per month, and the continued focus on neighborhood policing and action against persistent and prolific offenders has reduced the average for the first 9 months of 2019 to 23. I will say again that for victims, the overall reduction is small compensation, but for the country as a whole, it is the dividend from the government's continuing delivery of our commitment to keeping our communities safe. I want to recognize the success these trends represent and to thank the Commissioner and all his staff for their hard work. We are also investing in the physical assets and equipment that a modern police force needs. Mr. Speaker, you will have seen in the press only recently that the RCIPS has acquired a new class of state-of-the-art, fully equipped vehicles. More will come into service in the coming budget period. We are providing the full year funding for the new police helicopter and indeed for the second helicopter that will arrive next month and extend further the capacity of the RCIPS for operational policing, border security, and disaster management. I'm sure that you will be pleased to hear, Mr. Speaker, that we will be progressing the development of the new West Bay Police Station. Funding has also been provided for the RCIPS to help in the fight against money laundering and terrorist financing, and the new digital forensics hub creates new capacity to investigate and tackle cybercrime. I've made the point in this House many times before, Mr. Speaker, but I'll do it again. Community safety is not just a matter of policing. I have been greatly encouraged by the recent efforts of the National Security Council to develop more of a whole-of-government approach to keeping Cayman safe. Particularly important in that respect is the development of an anti-gang strategy led by the Deputy Governor personally. The budgets going to a number of departments and entities will fund activities as part of the delivery of that strategy. The benefits are twofold. First, the disruption of gang activity makes a significant contribution to reducing crime. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly in the long run, the implementation of this strategy improves the life chances, particularly of young people who might otherwise have been caught up in gang activity and fallen into criminality. Alongside that work to combat gang activity, the government is continuing to support vulnerable young people and families. The police will ensure that their officers continue the prioritization of investigations related to child abuse and domestic violence through the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, or MASH. Other government agencies, notably the Department of Children and Family Services, will support that work. The budget secures the funding for the opening and operation of a new special needs residential facility for children in care, to ensure they receive dedicated and appropriate care at a time when those young people are particularly vulnerable. More broadly, my apologies, Mr. Speaker. If I may begin again. More broadly, the budget includes a capital allocation to fund the next stage of the courthouse redevelopment project that will see facilities for the Court of Appeal in the government-procured Scotia building, a new 6-story court facility, and a renovation of the existing courthouse to provide additional courtrooms. The budget also takes forward the much-needed work on a new prison facility to replace the existing male and female prisons at Northward and Fairbanks, to provide modern facilities for all types of offenders in a single location. We're also making new investments in the fire service, including replacement fire trucks and new safety equipment to enable firefighters to carry out their duties more effectively and safely. The new Coast Guard service will also continue to move forward thanks to resources provided within this budget. Of particular note is the capital allocation being made to purchase new vessels and to upgrade equipment in the new service. This investment is being made in part as a response to the need for enhanced border security, but the remit of the Coast Guard service goes well beyond that. In particular, the Coast Guard will greatly enhance both the capacity and professionalism of Cayman's maritime search and rescue capability. The key to the successful and effective rollout of our new Coast Guard service is its new Operations and Rescue Coordination Center, which will become fully operational next year. Cayman's new Customs and Border Control Service has now been operating successfully for some time. The guiding philosophy for the creation of the service has been a move from routine revenue collection and immigration control to a more integrated and intelligence-led approach. As the 9 months of operations have shown, it is possible both to tighten Cayman's borders against potential criminality and other threats and to make life easier for legitimate travelers. Investments proposed in the coming budget period will continue the success of the changes already implemented. For example, plans to introduce the new electronic passport kiosks for immigration are funded as part of this budget. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we have not forgotten the sister islands, and the coming budget will see a number of important projects delivered for the benefit of communities there. We will complete the renovations and additional buildings for district administration in Cayman Brac, the parking lots and hard courts for tennis at the Brac Playfield, and the interior works to the multipurpose hall. Work will also be undertaken to construct the Little Cayman boat launch, ramp, and jetty. Mr. Speaker, this budget is one that delivers the priorities not just of the government, but of the country. We are able to take action to respond to the immediate concerns being voiced by communities across these islands, at the same time as making good on the promises we made when this unity government was formed. We are able to deliver against today's priorities while also recognizing that some of the challenges Cayman will face in the years ahead will require different responses. Rather than put off meeting those challenges for some future government to face, even at this point in the electoral cycle, this government is willing to begin the groundwork that will enable governments to come to meet the challenges we face full on. We are able to do all that, Mr. Speaker, only because of the past 6.5 years of careful restoration of this nation's financial health. When the previous administration was elected in 2013, we set out a very clear and unambiguous financial strategy. We would ensure the careful stewardship of public finances to bring the government into compliance with the requirements of the Public Management and Finance Law. We would do so through restraining government costs, and at the same time, we would not impose any new fees or taxes. In fact, we would reduce them where we could. We would pay down government debt, and we would not enter into any new borrowing. 6.5 years on, and this government has maintained that successful strategy. This budget adheres to the strict fiscal principles that have guided us throughout our term. This budget remains in full compliance with the Public Management and Finance Law. This budget delivers our spending priorities, but still ensures a healthy operating surplus. Fees and duties are once again held steady, and previous reductions are maintained. The ambitious capital investment program we have set out is being paid for from revenue without any need to borrow. This is a track record of successful financial management that any government in the world would be proud of. Once again, I thank the Minister of Finance for his sage financial advice and for the positive way he has taken forward the financial strategy we put in place. I am also grateful to his Treasury team, led by the Financial Secretary, for all the endless hours of hard work that has gone into pulling this budget together, and to the Deputy Governor and his Chief Officer colleagues for the support and advice they have given to the Government Caucus to help us in making the policy choices to which this budget gives financial expression. Of course, I must also thank the Deputy Governor, Cabinet Secretary and Attorney General, and the Clerk for their work as members of the Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, I want to pay special tribute to my friend, the Attorney General, whose counsel to the government and me over the past few years in particular has been invaluable. Through the seemingly endless stream of difficult legal challenges, he has been supportive, sage, and steadfast. Allow me to, please, Mr. Speaker, to single out the chief officers in the ministries for which I hold constitutional responsibility. Samuel Rose, Eric Bush, Teresa Echenike, Wesley Howell, and Michael Ebanks, the latter who is currently acting in Mr. Howell's stead, and to thank them for their tireless efforts to find ways to squeeze ever more in terms of results from the pot of resources available. As I'm sure they will testify, it is not always an advantage to be the chief officers for the Premier's ministries. Equally, Mr. Speaker, the team that supports me in the office of the Premier often worked long hours. And so I also wish to thank Roy Tatum, the head of the office of the Premier, along with Kieran Stigant, Julia Hutton, Tammy Chisholm, Jana Pucha Bush, and Frank Cornwall for their support and dedication. So let me be clear, Mr. Speaker. This budget, like all others, has required us to make choices. There are always things that we would have liked to be able to fund, but for which we just could not find the money. There are investments that would yield benefits to Cayman that are just not affordable at this time. The process we have gone through as a caucus has allowed us to work through the alternatives, and the package of proposals that were finally included in this budget represent the result of a very long and sometimes quite painful debate. I must thank my caucus colleagues for their support, their advice, and their patience over the last few months as we have put this budget together. On behalf of myself, and I'm sure all my ministerial colleagues, I want to thank our 4 councillors for their help and support, which all too often goes unnoticed outside of government itself. The long hours they have put in to help get this budget right are very much appreciated. For myself, I'm sure there are many things I will miss about government after I step down as Premier. The budget process is unlikely to be one of them. That said, the outcome of the process is a budget that I am proud to commend to the House today. This is a budget that gives a much-needed boost to older persons and the vulnerable in our community. It is a budget for families. It is a budget that will bring relief to commuters. It is a budget for opportunities as we bring to fruition the development of work and continue to drive forward the improvements of our education system. It is a budget to tackle the issues faced by our people today, and a budget that provides a platform from which we can better meet the challenges of tomorrow. It is a budget that makes good on the promises this unit of government made to our people. No doubt you remember, as I do, Mr. Speaker, the tough negotiations that went into putting that program together. There were those who at the time very loudly proclaimed that it would all end in tears, that the government we had put together would not survive the first encounter with the harsh realities of political decision-making. We have proved the naysayers wrong. We have done so because the members of this government have been willing to set aside our political differences and work together in the best interest of this country. This budget is yet further demonstration of that, and I ask the House to vote aye so that this government team can get on and deliver the program of action that we are setting out. Mr. Speaker, before I close, I want to speak to 2 matters that are of such significant importance that I believe they warrant our immediate attention. The first, Mr. Speaker, is with regard to the ruling yesterday on same-sex marriage by the Court of Appeal. In a press release yesterday, I welcome the news that the Court of Appeal had agreed with government that the original ruling of the Chief Justice in the case regarding same-sex marriage created significant ambiguity surrounding the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and the interpretation of and ability of the court to amend laws. We have always said that it was critical that the country had the benefit of clarification on those very important constitutional issues. The Court of Appeal judgment does clarify that, and I believe this is a significant ruling. That said, Mr. Speaker, while I, and I suspect that all of us in this House, do appreciate the ruling, we should be mindful that it comes with a declaration by the court that this legislature should act expeditiously in ensuring that same-sex couples have legal protection under a law that provides the, quote, functional equivalent to marriage, unquote. Mr. Speaker, I do expect that this Honourable House will indeed consider this matter expeditiously, but we cannot do so hastily. Given that we have before us a 2-year budget to get through, as well as a referendum, I do not see this Honourable House turning their attention to this issue before early next year. In the interim, I do urge members to read and carefully consider the judgment and the declaration. It is clear to me that if this legislature does not provide the legal framework that provides the protections for same-sex couples in a form that is acceptable to all Caymanians, then undoubtedly we will end up with the UK levying upon us protections that suit them rather than us. I believe the responsible thing for this House to do is to face up to this issue and take its own decision. We have rightly complained that on occasion the UK has overreached by interfering in matters that should be decided by Caymanians. By the same token, we cannot abdicate responsibility for taking the hard decisions when they are staring us in the face. The second matter, Mr. Speaker, concerns constitutional amendments. On 17th December 2018, I provided this House with an update on the constitutional talks that were had with the UK and a Cayman Islands delegation headed by me. The Cayman delegation included the Honorable Attorney General, the Minister for Commerce, the Minister for Financial Services, the then Leader of the Opposition, the MLA for Northside, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the Member for Newlands, who still is the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and various support personnel. We were ably assisted by Sir Geoffrey Jowell QC. The discussions went well, Mr. Speaker, and indeed it was good to have the leadership of the opposition present, who along with government spoke with one voice to indicate to the UK representatives that what was being sought had the support of both sides of the Legislative Assembly. These were important talks, Mr. Speaker, and those present on both sides understood this, for they had as their genesis the real need for islands to better protect the hard-won progress over the past 60 years toward appropriate local control of local affairs. This is important not just to insulate ourselves against unwarranted interference and overreach by Parliament in the UK, but also to ensure that we maintain the ability to grow our economy and control our political future. And we were able to be persuasive across a number of necessary changes, some of which I will mention below. Regrettably, although we had broad agreement at the time, the all-consuming Brexit debate in the UK halted the package of agreed changes, moving to the Prime Minister, who at the time was Theresa May. Fortunately, Mr. Speaker, we have managed to get things unstuck, and I am awaiting an imminent letter from Lord Ahmad on the final package of changes that has now been approved. Much time has passed since those initial conversations and those that ensued earlier this year. However, once I have the letter and the approved changes, I will advise this Honourable House and the public. As I have said often, these changes ought not to be controversial and are aimed at protecting our islands and our ability to guide our own future. Members of this House regularly rail against what we consider overreach by the Governor, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and the UK Parliament, and we protest them interfering in our affairs. These changes are principally aimed at limiting the ability of the UK to interfere locally. They include safeguards to clarify that the Cayman Islands has autonomous capacity with respect to domestic affairs, clarification regarding Her Majesty's reserved powers, as noted in Section 125, that is the power to make laws for peace, order, and good government. Abolishing the power of the Governor to disallow legislation passed by this House. Abolishing the Governor's reserved power to enact legislation unilaterally, subject to the ability of the Governor to address Parliament under certain conditions. Clarifying that any obligations imposed on the islands by the Governor, the UK Parliament, or the Crown be consistent with our constitutional rights, freedoms, and responsibilities under the Bill of Rights. Removing the Governor's exemption from the duty to consult Cabinet, and that the exercise of the Governor's and the Secretary of State's powers would not be immune from judicial review. Increasing the number of ministers in Cabinet from 7 to 8. Clarifying that ministers may be assisted by individual MLAs, now known as councillors. Such MLAs would instead be referred to as parliamentary secretaries. Establishing a new police service commission. Renaming the Legislative Assembly to Parliament. Abolishing the requirement for the Governor to approve the standing orders made by this House, and including the functions of the Cabinet Secretary in the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, these, I believe, are the main items that had some form of initial agreement. I say again that I am awaiting the approved package, but I do believe that most, if not all, of the aforementioned will remain part of that package. We shall see. But, Mr. Speaker, I say again that none of the above should give any member of this House or the public any cause for undue concern. They are aimed squarely at strengthening our Constitution in key areas, given the maturity and confidence in ourselves that our islands have shown over the past 60 years. They also provide, as I said, Mr. Speaker, some degree of insulation from the overreach of the UK Parliament that has threatened us and continues to threaten us. When those threats come, as they have before, Mr. Speaker, we in here wax lyrically. But all the talking we do is for naught unless we put ourselves in a stronger position constitutionally. So when the approved package of changes is here and we start to debate them, I pray that we in this House are able to put aside partisan politics and take up national pride and support the changes, just as we did in December last year. If I may end on a personal note, Mr. Speaker, last April when I finished my speech introducing the SPS, I recognized that there was still much work remaining for this government to do. I gave a pledge then that I would give everything I have to get it done. I repeat that pledge to the House and to the country today. In As You Like It, playwright William Shakespeare wrote, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts." My exit as Premier may be coming, Mr. Speaker, but I have a few parts yet to play. In the time remaining, I will redouble my efforts and focus my full capacity on achieving the goals that this government has set out in the budget to be presented today. I commend that budget to this Honourable House, Mr. Speaker. May God continue to bless these beloved Isles Cayman.
Sir.
We'll give the next item a minute as the Premier and the Finance Minister discuss all but quickly. The House continues, Clerk.
Government business, bills. First reading, the Appropriation Financial Years 2020-2021 Bill 2019.
The bill has been read a first time and is now set down for the second reading.
Second reading, the Appropriation Financial Years 2020 and 2021 Bill 2019.
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Appropriation Financial Years 2020 and 2021 Bill 2019.
Ordered. The member is intending to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is indeed my honor this morning or today to rise and present the Appropriation Financial Years 2020 and 2021 Bill 2019. Mr. Speaker, the appropriations set out in the bill now before this House, together with the budget documents I tabled earlier, collectively form the government's 2020 and 2021 budgets. Thanks to the sustainable fiscal strategy that the government has been working on for over the last 6 years, I can once again reassure the House that the budgets are compliant with the Public Management and Finance Law and the Framework for Fiscal Responsibility. As the Minister for Finance and Economic Development, I am pleased to present a budget which is grounded in sound fiscal policy. As I shall illustrate later, Mr. Speaker, there are few nations that are in as strong a financial position as the Cayman Islands are today. As I shall also demonstrate, we are in that strong position only because of the willingness of this government to put in place the fiscal strategy that the country needed, and perhaps more importantly, to stick to it. I will highlight the key figures for the House. In summary, the 2020 and 21 budget forecast: stable annual operating revenues of $825 million in 2020 and $849.7 million in 2021. And it should not escape us today, Mr. Speaker, that in US dollar terms, that is $2 billion over the next 2 years in revenues. This strong revenue position reflects that the country's track record of economic growth is expected to continue without increasing the tax burden on Caymanian families. Annual operating and financing expenses of $759.7 million in 2020 and $774.4 million in 2021 to fund the expanded and enhanced public services which deliver on the commitments this government has made to the people. Robust core government operating surpluses of $65.3 million in 2020 and $75.3 million in 2021 that allow us to maintain our track record of making capital investments from cash without the need to borrow. Forecast cash balances of $327 million at the 31st of December 2020 and $287.1 million at the 31st of December 2021, maintaining stable cash reserves well above the minimum required by the FFR, while also funding capital investments, paying down debt, and ensuring we have funds available in order to sustain future economic shocks. Capital investments of $182.6 million in 2020 and $121.4 million in 2021 to fund significant infrastructure improvements to meet today's needs and secure the country's future. Investments will also be made to support our statutory authorities and government companies, and reductions in core government debt of $35.9 million in 2020 and $34.3 million in 2021. Turning now to our fiscal policy, Mr. Speaker. On 12th April 2019, when government presented its 2020 strategic policy statement, which set out in macro terms the government's medium-term fiscal policies and financial forecasts for the next 3 financial years, 2020 to 2022. The 2020 and 2021 budgets presented today are consistent with these policies and forecasts, As always, the numbers vary in detail from the April presentation, but the direction and the trend remains the same. The changes made reflect more accurate and up-to-date information now available on which we are able to base these estimates. Our overriding financial strategy is to sustainably manage government's finances by adhering to the following guiding tenets. 1, compliance with the principles of responsible financial management. 2, no new fees or taxes levied on the public. And 3, no new borrowings. You have heard this mantra before, but I make no apologies here today, Mr. Speaker, for repeating our 3 fiscal rules again to the House today. It is only by resolutely holding steadfast to these tenets over the past 6 financial years that the government has placed the Cayman Islands on the sound financial footing we now enjoy. As a result, we have positioned the country well to embrace opportunities for continued economic and social development and ensured that we are in the best possible position to withstand future economic shocks. We have also built the resources and capacity to tackle head-on the issues facing us as we continue to develop these islands for the benefit of our people. Sound finances are a cause for celebration, but they should not become an end in and of themselves. The really important thing that shines through this budget is that the strong financial platform that this government has created is enabling us to allocate the resources necessary to propel the ambitious agenda we have set for our country and for our people. This budget keeps us moving forward on the path to long-term fiscal sustainability. At the same time, it allows us to increase spending to deliver key priorities such as supporting vulnerable Caymanians, increasing educational opportunities for our young people, and ensuring Cayman remains a safe place to live, work, and do business. Let me mention briefly the delivery of our fiscal strategy. First, our compliance with the principles of responsible financial management, in particular, achieving substantial surpluses each year. Mr. Speaker, compliance with the principles of responsible financial management is required under the PMFL. It is not an option for us. Failure to do so would result in us surrendering control of our budget to the United Kingdom, stripping us of that most basic privilege of deciding for ourselves how to spend our money. We have been forced down that road before, and no one in this House wants to see Cayman back in that position. This government believes our financial independence should be fiercely protected, and we are committed to ensuring that the Cayman Islands maintain the ability to control its own budget. The challenge of operating public sector finances to generate a surplus position is one that faces countries around the world. Few are responding to that challenge as positively as the Cayman Islands. Worldwide, data shows that fewer than 20% of governments reported having a budget surplus. The Cayman Islands rank 7th in the world with a budget surplus equal to about 4.4% of our GDP, just behind Hong Kong, which reported a surplus of 5.2% of GDP. Many countries, including a large number who criticize Cayman's tax-neutral status, are running substantial budget deficits. With this budget, we are taking further action to ensure that we remain in full compliance with the PMFL and FFR. This unity government continues to act in the long-term best interest of the Caymanian people and this country. Managing our finances to generate operating surpluses means that we will be spending less on our operating activities than we earn in revenues. By doing so, we will continue to build our cash reserves, be able to fund our significant program of capital investments, and eliminate the need for any borrowings. Achieving this goal of our fiscal strategy is a significant challenge to both policymakers and civil servants, as there is continuous pressure to increase expenditure to meet ever-changing demands for public services. I thank the Honourable Premier, my fellow colleagues in the Government Caucus, and all civil servants for their continued efforts to seek out cost-effective solutions to meet these needs while delivering a budget that is fully compliant. No new taxes levied on the public. Keeping the tax burden as low as possible is another critical element of our fiscal strategy. This government believes in economic freedom. This means that the best place for the dollars earned by the hard work and enterprise of Caymanians is in their pockets and not the government's coffers. The amount governments take should only be that which is necessary to do the things that government is best placed to do on behalf of the people collectively. And I remind the House and this country that it has now been some 7 years without any increases in government taxes. Experience the world over has shown that human ingenuity creates the business solutions which drive economic development, not government intervention. This government is committed to creating and enforcing a legislative framework which supports the development of a fair and equitable business environment. It is that which generates opportunities for Caymanians as owners, investors, employees, and consumers. This government's approach is yielding results. Our sound stewardship of the finances and our fiscal restraint are giving business the confidence to invest in Cayman. This stimulates more growth and generates more jobs. These things in turn create higher government revenues that maintain our sound finances even as we invest more in our economic future. And so it goes on, Mr. Speaker. This is the virtuous circle at the heart of our strategy here today. Government has no plans to undertake any borrowings throughout the 2020-21 budget period. Instead, we are focused on continuing to pay down our debt. This conservative but prudent fiscal strategy is absolutely right for Cayman. Through it, this government is ensuring that we do not burden future generations with the costs of the decisions that we make today. We have a responsibility to take calculated steps to ensure that we act in a sustainable manner. Moreover, the financial strength our strategy delivers ensures that we maintain the fiscal capacity to borrow should we be faced with unexpected economic hardships in times to come. In short, this strategy is right for Cayman today, and it is good for tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, this strategy has served us well, and we are continuing with it for the coming budget cycle. It is not just a strategy to avoid new borrowing. It is also a strategy to pay down the debt burden this government inherited. Again, this is right for us today and good for tomorrow. Paying down debt means that the debt financing charges we have to find from our operating budgets each year will decline, leaving more for us to spend on public services. Paying down debt now gives us flexibility and strength should we need to go to the market in the future. In the area of debt management, the government has much to be proud of. Our achievements over the past 6 years have been nothing short of extraordinary. Over this time frame, we have managed to reduce our core government debt by making payments of $442.1 million without having to suffer through major structural adjustments in our economy or massive public sector layoffs, as many countries have had to endure during this period. That outcome is a result of the discipline this government has shown in making sure that the operational surpluses that we have generated have not been frittered away, but instead have been used to reduce the debt burden. Later this month, we will achieve the largest ever single reduction in Cayman's public sector debt. As the House is aware, this month we will repay the $261.3 million or $312 million US dollars bullet bond that falls due. Also this month, we will be following through with our plans to refinance $153 million of that debt with an amortizing loan. That refinancing has long been planned and approved by this Honorable House in order to ensure that we maintain government's cash reserves and liquidity. The net effect of all of this is that we will have achieved at a single stroke a $108.3 million net reduction of debt in the 2019 financial year. It is somewhat ironic, Mr. Speaker, that we have had to ask the UK for a special agreement to make this repayment as it completely breaks through the FFR ceiling for our debt service ratio. But needless to say, Mr. Speaker, the UK had no problem whatsoever with what is only a technical breach of our target ratios. Achieving a net reduction of $108 million of government debt in 2019 alone is only possible because of the responsible fiscal strategy we have followed. As a government, we are justifiably proud of this achievement and the positive impact it has on our future financial position and on our economy. Turning now to the 2019 financial forecast, Mr. Speaker. Before delving into the details of the 2021 budget, it is important that I provide an update on the current state of public finances and the forecast to the 31st of December 2019. Overall, the 2019 financial year is on track to deliver better than budgeted results, driven in large part by continued growth in revenues that are in line with our growing economy. Operating revenues are forecast to be $824.2 million, some $101.4 million higher than estimated when the 2019 budget was set back in 2017. This better than expected performance is primarily attributed to strong growth in revenue lines such as import duties, stamp duties on land transfers, banks and trust companies fees, partnership fees, and tourism accommodation taxes. These results point to a healthy performance in our core economic sectors and demonstrate how the healthy Cayman economy benefits all Caymanians through the increased revenue yields that government can then spend on vital public services. This is a strong economy working for us all. In addition, the government earned significantly better than expected interest on its cash balances due to a combination of better market rates and maintaining higher cash balances. Operating expenses for core government are forecast to be $743.5 million for 2019, which is $85.7 million greater than the original budget of $657.8 million. Increases are forecast for personnel costs, which are trending higher by $24.5 million due to a combination of factors driven by increased health insurance premiums, the pension contribution rates, as well as the full-year impact of the 2018 cost of living adjustment. There has also been a significant increase of $25.8 million in the cost of tertiary medical care for indigents and qualified persons who have exceeded their personal health insurance. The government has also provided an additional funding of $18 million for the Health Services Authority and the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority for additional services. Statutory authorities and government-owned companies are forecast to have a net operating loss of $6.5 million for the year ending the 31st of December 2019, compared to an original budget loss of $5.8 million. The net result of these changes is that core government is now forecast to have an operating surplus of $80.6 million, an increase of $15.5 million over the approved 2019 budget. core government cash balances are forecast to be $438 billion at the end of December 2019. Overall, the impact of these updated projections for 2019 means that the government is forecast to strengthen its degree of compliance with the principles of responsible financial management and the FFR as follows: a higher operating surplus than originally planned, increased net worth, lower than an expected debt service ratio of 39.5% versus the budgeted ratio of 46.7%. Normally, the maximum debt service ratio is 10%. However, as I said earlier, it was agreed with the United Kingdom to allow for this one-off breach as it is driven by the scheduled debt repayment that will take place later this month. A net debt ratio of less than 0%, which is considerably better than the budgeted 17.4%. The forecast improvement is driven by our reduced debt burden and higher cash balances. And what this means, Mr. Speaker, is that for the first time in probably several decades, our cash balances will exceed the country's national debt. Cash reserves at the 31st of December are forecast to be 186.4 days of operating expenses, more than double the originally budgeted degree of compliance of 91.4 days. Mr. Speaker, the forecast financial outturn for 2019 is a clear indicator of the firm foundation of our public sector finances. We will end 2019 in an even better financial position than what this government's stringent financial strategy had called for. And it is on this foundation that we have produced the 2020-21 budgets. Mr. Speaker, the budget has been prepared with the knowledge and context of the current state and medium forecast for the local and global economy. The Cayman Islands economy does not exist in a vacuum. We are inextricably linked to the ups and downs of the wider global economy. We are living in a dynamic and challenging times with seemingly ever-increasing forces of change impacting us from many different angles, including political, technological, and environmental sources. The International Monetary Fund, in its Fall World Economic Outlook, published just last month, summarized the current state of play in the global economy in this way. The global economy is in a difficult situation, and the forecast is subject to considerable downside risk. The Premier stated in his address earlier that there is every possibility that we may face an economic slowdown during this budget period. And one has only to turn to the international news to find major issues impacting the global economy. Stories like Brexit, the US and China trade war, disruptive public protests, and the impacts of natural catastrophes. Invariably, Mr. Speaker, these events will have an impact on our country. The possibility of a slowdown must be one of the risks we consider as we weigh budget priorities, and I can assure the House today that the 2020-21 budgets have taken these global factors into account as best we can, given the uncertainties that exist. It is probably part of the job of a finance minister to be somewhat of a prophet of doom. But, Mr. Speaker, I refuse to take that route. There is every reason to believe that Cayman is in a good position to weather any coming economic storms we may face. There are, after all, many things which are positive in our local economy. The Cayman Islands are currently enjoying a period of robust economic growth and prosperity. We have enjoyed several consecutive years of solid, sustained economic growth with an average annual growth rate of 3% in our gross domestic product. I will emphasize again here, Mr. Speaker, that this is a long-term, sustainable, private sector-led growth. It reflects a strong underlying real-world economy, not the debt-fueled excesses of government-funded short-term fixes. While we must always remain cognizant of what is happening around us and keep our eye on the future, there is a strength and robustness to Cayman's economy that is the envy of many in this region. The Cayman Islands have much to be proud of from an economic development perspective. We have built a strong, stable economy by focusing on innovative, high value added services that are in constant demand by a broad base of international, commercial, and individual consumers. The fundamentals of the Cayman Islands economies are strong. Our key macroeconomic indicators tell the story very clearly. Real gross domestic product, the primary indicator for economic growth, is projected to increase by an average of 2.2% in 2020 and 2021. This growth, while a bit slower than the 3% average annual growth of the past 5 years, is still indicative of stable and a yet expanding economy. The lower projections reflect the global uncertainties I spoke of earlier, rather than to any issues of particular to what's taking place in Cayman. Inflation, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, is expected to fall to 2.5% in 2020 and 2% in 2021. This is lower than inflation rates over the last 2 years, but indicates that inflationary pressures in the economy will persist based on higher international commodity prices and increased local demand and levels of consumption. We must always remember that Cayman imports nearly all of its consumables and manufactured goods, and as a result, local prices are particularly vulnerable to price changes in the country of origin. I challenge our business community to continue to seek out new cost-effective sources for the products they retail in our local market. Also, individual consumers, remember you have the power in the choices you make about the items that you spend your money on. And I urge you all to use that power wisely. The unemployment rate for 2020 is forecast to be 3.5% and 3.6% in 2021, further indicating job market stability supported by a growing economy. Consequently, the level of Caymanian unemployment are also expected to be low and stable. It should be noted that these rates are lower than those forecast for the USA and other advanced economies. As I have said, growth in Cayman is generated by the enterprise and innovation that characterizes our private sector. Long may it remain so. Government has a responsibility to support growth and as far as possible to keep out of the way of private sector growth. That means minimizing the administrative and financial burden we impose on local businesses. Therefore, for the 2020-21 budgets, government will continue to offer the package of duty concessions that we have developed during our time in office, which support economic growth by keeping both the cost of doing business and the cost of living in Cayman as low as we can. These include the reduced import duty on diesel fuel used by CUC to generate electricity, the reduced import duty for licensed retailers, reduced import duty on building materials, reduced trade and business licenses fees for new licensees, the continuation of current incentives for Cayman Brac and Little Cayman, and reduced stamp duty rates for Caymanians purchasing their first property. These measures have proven to be very effective in supporting our local economy and empowering our people to make the most of their hard-earned dollars. Turning now to the 2020 and 2021 budgets. Mr. Speaker, for 2020, the government is forecast to earn operating revenues of $825 million, incur operating and financing expenses of $759.7 million, resulting in a core government surplus of $65.3 million. When factoring in the forecast $17.2 million operating losses of statutory authorities and government companies, the entire public service sector is forecast to have an overall net surplus of $48.1 million in 2020. In 2021, government is forecast to earn operating revenues of $849.7 million, incur operating and financing expenses of $774.4 million, resulting in a core government surplus of $75.3 million. And when factoring in the forecast $16.9 million loss of statutory authorities and government companies, the entire public sector is forecast to have an overall net surplus of $58.4 million. I will say again that in line with this government's pledge to not raise taxes, the 2020 and 21 revenue forecasts do not include any new revenue measures or any material changes to government's revenue earning structure. In addition, given the global economic uncertainties, we have taken a conservative stance with regard to our revenue growth forecasts. Total operating revenue of $825 million, $783.4 million will be coercive revenue, and $41.6 million in sales of goods and services and other operating income, such as interest on our deposits. In 2021, forecast revenue of $849.7 million, $806.6 million of which will come from coercive revenues, and $43.1 million in sales of goods and services and other operating revenues. This Honourable House will note that the 2020 operating revenue figure is literally the same as the revised forecast for 2019. I mentioned earlier that the 2021 forecast is just 3% higher than the estimate for 2020. While others may have been tempted to post higher forecasts in order to artificially boost spending, that would not be consistent with the prudent approach this government has followed throughout its term. Should income be higher than forecast, we can obviously look at the potential for supplementary estimates, but I would rather do it in that way than be forced to cut spending because our revenue forecasts proved to be far too optimistic. Government will be realizing and transferring approximately $34 million and $34.2 million into general revenues from the various trust accounts whose holding period is scheduled to mature in 2020 and 2021 respectively. These are one-off transactions that relate to bona vacantia financial assets that by law become the property of the government after being held in trust by the government with no claims being made against them after a period of 4 years. Operating expenditure in 2020 is forecast to be $747.2 million and $763.4 million in 2021. These amounts represent an increase over the 2018-2019 levels and are directly related to the provision of enhanced and expanded services and programs across the government as we continue to meet the commitments we gave to the country. My colleagues will no doubt speak to the detail during their contribution to the debate on this bill, Mr. Speaker, but I want to outline the major drivers for the increased operating expenditure levels in 2020 and 2021, which are a continued focus on the government's strategic priority to improve teaching and learning in schools, including reviewing and strengthening the provision of special education services and early childhood care and education, continued review and implementation of the new education curriculum in high schools, following its successful introduction at primary level this year. As the Premier said earlier, we are also bringing forward the continued development and implementation of technical and vocational training. Continued investment in keeping communities safer through the enhancement of policing services, including community policing and outreach, and child protection via the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub unit. To support the infrastructure improvements also in the budget, the RCIPS budget provides for the development and implementation of a traffic management plan and an establishment of the Coast Guard unit. Border security has rightly assumed a higher profile in recent years, and this budget allocates funding for the continued development of the effective and efficient administration, implementation, enforcement, and evolution of the border control laws and regulations, changing processes to maintain compliance with international obligations under treaties and conventions related to the management of regular and irregular migration, and enhancement of the management of employment and national workforce developments. A key new initiative in this budget is the establishment of a new ministry responsible for international trade, investment, aviation, and maritime affairs to advance the economic and political interests of the Cayman Islands, including making it easier for potential overseas investors to do business in the Cayman Islands. Our financial services industry remains the cornerstone of Cayman's economy, and this government has strenuously defended that industry while at the same time ensuring it is properly regulated. To that end, this budget provides the resources necessary to enhance financial services policy functions and the regulatory services provided by the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority in order to keep pace with the evolving international regulatory requirements, enhance competitiveness of the financial services industry through advancements in policy, legislation, and strategy, and enhance international engagement to counter threats to the domestic financial services industry and improve the reputation of the jurisdiction. Additional resources are being made available to strengthen the capacity and resilience of the Cayman Islands Fire Services. Implementation of this integrated solid waste management system, continuation of the highly successful culling program for the invasive green iguana, and the commencement of operations of the new long-term residential mental health facility. Enhanced information technology services, including essential improvements in cybersecurity and extending the program of e-government initiatives, which is making services more efficient and easier to access for the benefit of both local people and the business community. There is funding also to meet the one-off costs associated with the conduct of the 2020 National Census and the 2021 general elections. I am delighted, Mr. Speaker, that we have the money to increase further our financial support of seniors, and the government will also be working to promote the rights and welfare of those most vulnerable in society. And the budget provides increased funding to the Cayman Islands National Insurance Company, Synico, for the continued provision of health insurance services to its clients. The comprehensive improvement in public services outlined in this budget require investments in people to deliver them. We are therefore funding additional teachers and educational specialists to ensure our young people are given increased opportunities through education. We are employing more police officers, Coast Guard officers, and more staff in the prison service and other public safety personnel as we improve community safety, enhance border security, and invest in the criminal justice system. A number of agencies across the public sector will be taking on additional staff as part of the government's drive for compliance with international regulatory frameworks for the financial services industry. Overall, personnel costs are forecast to increase in line with $28 million in planned recruitment of additional officers to enhance capacity and improve services throughout government. Outputs from statutory authorities and government companies are expected to increase by $2.6 million in 2020 and a further $3.4 million in 2021. These changes are mostly attributed to higher health insurance premiums for pensioners, seafarers, and veterans, and additional funding required by the Monetary Authority to strengthen their regulatory services. Collectively, our SAGCs are forecast to produce net deficits of $17.2 million in 2020 and $17 million in 2021. These deficits are driven by decreased financial performance by a number of entities led by significant operating losses at the Health Services Authority and Cayman Airways. The major components of operating expenses in the budgets, as shown in the financial statements, are personnel costs, budgeted to be $363.6 million in 2020 and $373.5 million in 2021, to fund the additional staff to deliver the initiatives included in this budget that I have just spoken to. Supplies and consumables are budgeted to be $124.9 million in 2020, $127.2 million in 2021. Depreciation, budgeted at $38.4 million for 2020 and $39.7 million for 2021, reflecting the increase in the value of government's assets at various capital projects are completed and brought online. Mr. Speaker, it is important to remind honourable members and the general public that depreciation is a non-cash expenditure item which recognizes the cost of the assets through the operating statement in a systematic way over the expected useful life of the asset. Outputs from statutory authorities and government companies forecast to be $131.8 million in 2020 and $135.2 million in 2021. The budget in this category will be used to fund the following: $41.8 million in 2020 and $44.5 million in 2021 to Cineco for the provision of health insurance benefits to civil service pensioners and qualified seafarers and veterans. $30.4 million per year in 2020 and 2021 to the Health Services Authority for the provision of various medical services to the community. $18.5 million per year in 2020 and 2021 to Cayman Airways for the provision of international airlift to the Cayman Islands from strategic tourism markets and domestic airlift between our three islands, and $23.1 million per year in 2020 and 21 to the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority for enhanced regulatory capacity to keep abreast of these ever-changing international regulatory requirements. Outputs from non-governmental output suppliers are expected to remain stable over the budget period. Are forecast to be $31.2 million in 2020 and $28.8 million in 2021. The major items of this category are $19.7 million in 2020, $17.6 million in 2021 for tertiary medical care at various local and overseas providers for uninsured, underinsured, and indigent persons. $2.6 million in 2020 and $2.7 million in 2021 for legal aid services. $1.3 million per year in 2020 and 2021 for care, custody, and processing of irregular migrants, and $2 million for 2020 and 2021 for the care of indigent and disabled elderly persons. Transfer payments are forecast to be $44.9 million in 2020 and $46.2 million in 2021. These funds will be used to deliver critical social programs that support our young people in achieving their educational goals and provide vital financial support to the most vulnerable in our society. The major transfer payments budgeted for 2020 and 21 are $10 million per year in 2020 and 21 for local and overseas scholarships to more than 2,000 students per year to enable them to pursue advanced studies and acquire the skills necessary to take the Cayman Islands forward. $15.2 million in 2020 and $17.1 million in 2021 for temporary and permanent financial assistance to support the most vulnerable in our communities. $9.8 million in 2020 and $11.1 million in 2021 for ex gratia payments to retired seamen and veterans, and $2 million in 2020 to the Chapel Church, Bodden Town, for the completion of the Bodden Town Hurricane Shelter. Financing expenses are expected to be $12.5 million in 2020 and $10.9 million in 2021. These expenses will cover the interest payments and other financing costs associated with the core government's portfolio of debt, which will be reduced by $35.9 million in 2020 and $34.3 million in 2021. The net operating performance of statutory authorities and government companies, $17.2 million in a deficit of $17.2 in 2020 and $16.9 million in 2021. These losses are recognized as an expense on the operating statement of the core government and are being driven to a large part to significant changes to the forecast financial outturns by a number of entities when compared to the previous budget cycle. Most notably, Cayman Airways and the Health Services Authority are forecast to have operating deficits in 2020 of $7.1 million and $10.9 million respectively, and $5.7 million and $12.8 million respectively in 2021. I should add, Mr. Speaker, in many cases the financial performance reflects the strategic objectives government is pursuing through the entities involved. For example, Cayman Airways is funded to enable it to operate vital services between our three islands and to support the economy by maintaining important air links with strategic markets. Therefore, while government will continue to push the SAGCs to take action to maximize their financial performance, we recognize that there is an important balance between financial performance, commercial realities, and the desired outcomes we are seeking to achieve by these SAGCs. Turning now to capital investments, Mr. Speaker, this government recognizes that public sector capital investments are a necessary and important economic catalyst for the continued economic development of these islands. For this budget cycle, government will be increasing the level of capital investments in order to address a number of infrastructural needs that are necessary in order to build the capacity needed to meet the needs of the people, while also supporting and encouraging economic growth. These investments are being made only after thorough analysis to determine their appropriateness, cost-effectiveness, and sustainability. The resulting capital program is hugely ambitious, but now is the time for that ambition, Mr. Speaker. The Premier has already spoken of the need to bring forward much-needed investment in our road infrastructure. At the same time, we have a significant number of key projects moving towards fruition that I will detail shortly. We have set out with the ability to finance all of these significant projects. And while inevitably some may slip beyond the budget period, the government is confident that we will deliver a major portfolio of projects over the next 2 years. Taken together, progressing these projects represents one of the most important steps forward for the islands in our recent history. The government intends to make capital investments totaling $182.6 million in 2020 and a further $121.4 million in 2021. These planned capital investments will be entirely funded from existing resources, that is, cash generated from operating activities and surplus cash reserves. I reiterate that there will be no borrowings in 2020 and 2021. Planned investments in core government assets for 2020 are $154.6 million and $96.5 million in 2021. The major investments in this category being $42.9 million in 20 and $25.3 million in 2021 to the Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands for the continued development of the new John Gray campus, upgrades to other school infrastructure, and the development of a new Sunrise Adult Training Center. $33.8 million in 2020 and a further $8.3 million in 21 to the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing to fund the construction of the new residential mental health facility, implementation of the integrated solid waste management system, including the capping and remediation at the Georgetown landfill, as well as the acquisition of additional property for the ISWIMS project. $19.1 million in 2020 and $17.8 million in 2021 to the Ministry of Financial Services and Home Affairs to fund the construction of a new prison facility at Northward and enhanced information technology infrastructure to strengthen our capacity to handle international tax cooperation and other financial services matters. $14 million per year in 2020 and 21 to development of and upgrades to the road network infrastructure across the 3 Cayman Islands, including the major upgrades of the east-west capacity on Grand Cayman announced by the Premier. $9.4 million in 2020, $5.9 million in 2021 to the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Investment and Infrastructure to continue the upgrade of the facilities to the Department of Vehicle and Equipment Services, information technology upgrades to enhance cybersecurity and expand e-government offerings. $8.3 million in 2020, $1.3 million in 2021 to a Judicial Administration Fund to fund the renovation and fit out of the courts building in Georgetown. $6 million in 2020 and $4.3 million in 2021 to the Ministry of Employment and Border Control to fund new border security systems and fit out and equipment for the Department of Workforce Opportunities and Residency Cayman, or WORK. $2.9 million in 2020, $4 million in 2021 to the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism, Transport to fund the construction of a new National Weather Service building in Georgetown and renovations to the main District Administration building in Cayman Brac. $1.9 million in 2020 and $1.6 million in 2021 for the preparatory works in advance of the major project for the redevelopment of the cargo and cruise berthing port in Georgetown, Grand Cayman, and $1.1 million in 2020, $4.4 million in 2021 to the Office of the Commissioner of Police to invest in key service developments. The government is also planning to make capital investments into various SAGCs of $28 million in 2020, a further $24.9 million in 2021. These investments will fund debt service obligations, operational deficits, and various new capital investment projects. The major investments in these categories are $4 million in 2020 and $3.9 million in 2021 to the Cayman Turtle Conservation Education Center to fund operational deficits, $9.1 million per year in 2020 and 21 to Cayman Airways Limited to fund debt servicing obligations, $8 million in 2020 and $5 million in 2021 to the National Housing Development Trust to fund debt servicing obligations, and $4.5 million per year in 2020 and 21 to the Cayman Islands Development Bank to fund debt repayments. With respect to compliance with the principles of responsible financial management set out in the PMFL and FFR, the 2020-21 budget forecasts the following levels of compliance with the principles. Net operating positions should be positive. Core government's revenue should be greater than expenses. As I've mentioned before, we are forecasting a record net operating surplus. Government is forecast to record a net operating surplus of $65.3 million in 2020, $75.3 million in 2021. Net worth should be positive. Core government's assets less its liabilities are forecast to be $1.5 billion at the 31st of December 2020, $1.6 billion at the end of 2021. Debt service, that means that the annual payments of interest and principal related to all public sector borrowing commitments should not be more than 10% of core government revenues. Mr. Speaker, the government is forecast to have a debt service ratio of 7.8% in 2020 and 6.4% in 2021. Net debt, the total debt of core government plus the weighted average debt balance of public authorities less core government's liquid assets should be no more than 80% of government's revenue for the fiscal year. The net debt ratio is forecast again to be less than 0% in both years. This dramatic improvement, Mr. Speaker, is a direct result of our fiscal strategy that promotes building reserves and paying down debt as quickly as possible. As a result of this strategy, for the first time since the implementation of the FFR, government's cash reserves will be greater than its net debt. Cash reserves, being the unrestricted cash reserves, and that's the operating bank account and general reserve fund of the core government, measured at the lowest point in the financial year, should be sufficient to cover 90 days of core government's estimated operating expenditures. For 2020, the government is forecast to have sufficient cash reserves to cover 131 days of operating expenditure at the lowest point during that financial year. In 2021, the forecast is to have 118.5 days of cash reserves. Both years are expected to be well above the minimum 90-day threshold. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, it scarcely seemed possible 6 years ago, when this government first came into office, that the economy and the public finances would be in the healthy position that they are in today. And yet, here we stand. 5 years of 3% growth, falling unemployment, and projections of continuing growth. Year on year, government surpluses, growing investment in public services and infrastructure, and reducing public sector debt. How much better can it get? The appropriations outlined in the bill before this House and the accompanying budget documents set out a clear plan for how this government intends to utilize and prudently manage our financial resources. They ensure that at the end of the year, at the end of our second consecutive term, we will be able to lay before the electorate clear evidence of a job well done. We have delivered what we promised. We have moved the country's finances to full compliance with the PMFL, and we have achieved a financial strength that provides a stable platform for the years ahead. We have done this while keeping our promises not to take on new debt and not to introduce any new duties or revenue-raising measures. Indeed, across these two terms, we have a record of reducing duties where we have been able to do so. Perhaps more important than that rosy financial picture is what this government is the substance of what this budget will achieve. It is simply not a budget or an exercise in mathematics. It's an exercise in political decision making. And the decisions that my caucus colleagues and I are presenting in these appropriations will ensure that we will continue to deliver high-quality public services which meet the current and future needs of the people of the Cayman Islands, promote the sustainable economic development that is a key to these islands' prosperity, and make the necessary investments in infrastructure and service improvements that secure the future and the well-being of our people. The 2020-21 budget ensures that the government has the resources to continue to make progress towards achieving of all of its broad outcomes, placing particular emphasis on education, healthcare, social welfare, infrastructure development, public safety, and strengthening our key economic pillars. In doing so, we are ensuring that our people and our economy will build and continue to build resilience. By building resilience, we are ensuring that we have the skills and wherewithal to handle future challenges and continue the progress and prosperity of these beloved Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, as you are no doubt aware, the preparation of the government's budget is a massive undertaking, and it is only possible with the commitment and dedication of the civil service. I wish to thank His Excellency the Governor, the Honorable Premier, Deputy Premier, Cabinet members, official members of Cabinet, councillors, chief officers, and their staff for their commitment to the budget process. I especially want to pay tribute and give my thanks to the Financial Secretary and his team within the Ministry of Finance for their excellent work and the commitment to produce the 2020-21 budgets that now lay before this House. I have seen the long hours they have toiled often late into the evenings and on weekends in order to prepare this budget and get us to this point. I am eternally grateful to them all. I now humbly commend the Appropriation Financial Years 2020 and 2021 Bill 2019 to this Honourable House and ask all honourable members for their support of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion for the deferral of debate on the budget address.
The Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I move the deferral of the debate on the appropriation bill and the budget address to Wednesday, 13th of November, 2019.
Question is, be it resolved that the debate on the budget address be delivered Wednesday, 13th November 2019. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Motion for the throne speech, the policy statement, and the budget address to be debated simultaneously.
The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the debate on the throne speech, the policy statement, and the budget address be debated simultaneously, commencing on Wednesday, the 13th of November, 2019.
Question is, be it resolved that the throne speech, the policy statement, and the budget address be debated simultaneously on Wednesday, 13th of November, 2019. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Motion for the adjournment.
Before we move the adjournment, may I invite the former members of the House who are with us to lunch with us once we take this adjournment. Motion for the adjournment. The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of this Honourable House until Wednesday, 13th of November, 2019 at 10 a.m.
Question is that this Honourable House do stand now adjourned until Wednesday, the 13th of November, 2019. All in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. This Honourable Legislative Assembly stands adjourned until Wednesday, 13th of November, 2019 at 10 a.m.